To this regular meeting of the Shelburne Select Board of Tuesday, September 25th, 2018, which we call to order. The first item is to approve the agenda, and I would like to make a change, moving item 11, which is the request for approval to apply for a municipal planning grant, to follow immediately the town manager report as 6A.
Second.
And would accept a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Moved by Jamie.
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Any discussion?
Is this a move to approve the agenda?
We're amending it to just move up the
11 to
MPG
6A.
because Jason and Dean are here and we want to get them out.
Okay, do we want any other suggestions on amending the agenda, or are we just approving that?
By all
amendment?
means, add it to that if you have.
And I just had some changes to the minute, or the meeting minutes for September 11th, and so I would just move to delay approval of those minute meetings until the next meeting.
Okay? So it's a two-part change. One, to move 11 to 6A, and two, to pend approval of the September 11 minutes, meeting minutes until our October 9th meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, any comment in the public? Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and as soon as we get the Planning Commission head back, we'll be all set. The next item is it's public comments. Those will include from Ruth, a new library and town center project update, which we invite you to make now, Ruth, if you're willing.
Okay, very short. You may have noticed the demolition is complete. That went very smoothly. We were real excited by that. The new old structure that got taken down came away from Town Hall very easily, smoothly, no damage. So that was really our only worry there. So we're now in the process of site work, which is probably going to be about 2 weeks. There's quite a bit of trenching to be dug and ground to be shifted around so that footings can begin to come in. But it's already possible to see how the new building is going to kind of fit into that site, because they are beginning to kind of work from the outside in. So you can wander past, staying on this side of the barriers, to see what that's going to look like, at least like... And the only other thing I have is just to remind people we're having a groundbreaking event on Saturday at 11 a.m. Very brief comments. Rick Bassett has written us a poem, and there's going to be donuts and cider. So I hope everybody can make it. Everybody, that's public, anyone in town. That's all I have. Any questions? No?
Thank you,
Okay.
Ruth.
Thank you.
All right,
Great.
thank you.
Please, Linda.
Linda Reel, Falls Road. Just a question about railroad litigation. It's been heard that there is a date set, and I think it would be a good idea to keep us updated on your twice per month meetings where things stand with that.
Sure. Do you know the date off the top of your head? I'm happy to share the date.
24th, wasn't it, something like that? For the
Of October?
oral?
See if I can
Yeah.
find that while we're...
Yeah, we can confirm that, of course.
Yeah, we'll certainly keep you as aware as we are of significant dates and activity. And as you make the point, this is the first in some time, frankly, all summer. But we'll be happy to do that. Any other
You wanna take that
comments? I
No,
wanted to take note of the fact that we benefit from Lee's excellence as a photographer, and for those of you who may not yet know, he has been documenting the whole kit and caboodle of new library and town center construction from start, including the demolition. That in future years will probably be really invaluable for folks to have as record. So
I'll also put a plug in for Lee's photos in the new town plan, which I hope everybody picks up soon. There are a lot in there, so thank you for those images. And
we were all
Well
pleased,
done.
as Ruth noted, that when the building came down, the town hall still had 4 walls. So, so Are there any other public comments?
If I may, I do have an answer to the question about the rail litigation. Oral arguments in federal court on November 8. No time scheduled yet, but they will be on November 8.
Thank you, Lee. Any other comments, questions? Next item is Select Board comments. I'd like to lead off by making a brief one, which has to do with an appeal for continued patience for the construction in the village, which has occasioned lots of lines, lots of delays, lots of reasons to be impatient, which we won't, of course, be. There is an end to it at some point. The fellows and men and women with the stop and slow signs are not, they're not monstrous. They're trying to do their job, and they do it as best they can under some very difficult circumstances. So we appreciate everybody's understanding that these are critical projects. They come at this time of year. As well, we have some road work being done, and sort of anybody's experience in a day could be you don't seem to be able to avoid them. But we do appreciate everybody's patience and assure you that there is an end point. Anyone, Josh, you want to lead off? Mary?
The only comment I have is I've been hearing a lot from folks in town about trying to do, sorry to be a broken record, trying to bring together, I realize there's a lot on our plates, but bring together all of these studies that we talked about and try to distill them and synthesize them sooner rather than later. So I just wanted to see if there was anything I could do to facilitate the process. I know Josh and Lee were going to try to do that. So with all of the time I have on my hands, I would like to lend my support to try to facilitate that if possible. So if, with the board's consent, I'll reach out to Lee and Josh and try to do a little, add a helping hand, so to speak. What?
Bandwidth permitting.
Yeah,
Absolutely. We thank you.
thanks.
Jamie, comment?
I do. I have a brief statement that I would like to read. I'd like to take a brief moment to extend a public thank you to Vermont Railway for its generous donation of temporary parking space in connection with the new Pearson Library and Town Center construction project. Vermont Railway has provided our contractor, Negley & Chase, with temporary access to the adjacent Vermont Railway-owned lot to accommodate vehicle parking, which will allow contractors and other site personnel to park on site. Vermont Railway waived all monthly charges associated with Negley & Chase's use of this space, effectively saving the town $22,000. If Vermont Railway did not provide access to their lot with or without a fee, it is likely that the project would have incurred costs in excess of $22,000 to provide a shuttle service to and from a remote parking area for the duration of the project. A remote parking approach would have been required to avoid on-street parking that would have likely caused irritation with the surrounding businesses and residents in town. Vermont Railway's community gesture is greatly appreciated as we move forward with the project, and we wanted to recognize it publicly with a formal thank you on behalf of the town.
Thanks, Jamie. Any comment? Colleen?
Just, you know, the last couple of weeks, and with school starting again, and our town relies heavily on the work of volunteers, not just us up here, and all the committees and boards, but also those that just help with all of the activities that help make this community what it is, and especially for, and in my perspective, the children at the school, and all the volunteers for crosswalks, and the beginning and start of school was done safely without any injuries, accidents, or even near accidents. You know, even the rec department and all of the soccer season that's fully in swing right now, and all of the coaches are all volunteer parents, and we all have limits on our time. And it was just remarkable to me how many people were out there, how many people help on a consistent and constant basis, and they do it without any, you know, formal recognition or thank you.
Agreed. I mean, again, just to echo that, the fire department is doing fire prevention and safety days this week at the schools, which is always a wonderful experience for the kids.
My son is so excited.
Oh, yeah, same, both of mine. So it's, It's very much appreciated and just a great community gesture.
Thanks, Colleen. Any comments from the public? Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing no hands, the next item is the town manager report.
Thanks. As everyone knows, it remains a very busy time in our fair community here. Just a couple of quick items. We do have 2 vacancies on the Development Review Board right now. I had posted something on Front Porch Forum yesterday. We've had 1 expression of interest, and just wanted to put it out there to the viewing audience and those folks here. If anyone is interested, please feel free to contact Ravi in the zoning office or me in the town manager's office. We'll be glad to help you through that process. Speaking also of the fire department, the annual fire department breakfast will be on October 13 this year. And in light of the construction project next door, we'll be hosting that at Shelburne Community School rather than here. They're happy to let us use the kitchen and the cafeteria, and I think it'll be a much appreciated location there. And thirdly, questions seem to be coming up again about the Bay Road Bridge and how we navigate our way under that through the roadway. And I would just encourage folks, it's not that big a deal. Legally, 2 cars are allowed to pass through there. Whether that is smart or wise at any given point in time may depend on the nature of the vehicle on the other side of the bridge. So I think if we just all use a few seconds of calm and patience, we'll all get through that underpass safely. So again, it's legal for 2-way traffic. Stop, be careful, be patient. It's not such a bad thing to just let somebody else go through, and whether we go 1 at a time or 2 at a time, we'll get through safely and with a little patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Any comment, discussion? Any comment from the public? Moving along, the next item is rescheduled. We've made the change to move 11 to 6A, which is the time for which is now, and that is to request approval to apply for a municipal planning grant. And Dean is here.
I can get through this very, very quickly. I'm here seeking the board's endorsement of a grant application for the FY 2019 Municipal Planning Grant Program. There were materials included in your packets, I believe. The deadline for this grant application is October 1st, so it's coming up. The Municipal Planning Grant Program is a competitive program that has operated since about 1990. It's one of the major sources municipalities use for funding planning and zoning projects. The Planning Commission had considered a variety of different potential projects before deciding on submitting an application to do a project similar to one that was done in South Burlington, where the city of South Burlington hired consultants to develop, to use it in somewhat buzzword terminology, a PUD typology, a system for describing different types of planned unit developments. Shelburne zoning regulations currently have many different types of planned unit developments. PUDs are essentially a form of development as well as a process that one can take a development through. I think the Planning Commission recognizes that there are some opportunities for improving that section of the zoning regulations, and one way that we might do that is by studying different possible alternative PUD forms, much as South Burlington did. The maximum award for this grant program is $22,000. Having conversations with the consultant who did or is doing the work in South Burlington, I confirmed that we could do a project for a slightly larger amount. It would be $24,500. And the action that's being requested is to have this board endorse the application and to sign a resolution. I believe there was a copy of the resolution included in your packets. Before giving Jason an opportunity to make any final comments, I would say some things to note with the resolution include the fact that the resolution calls for the identification of the authorizing official, that's customarily in a town like Shelburne, the town manager. There's also an opportunity to designate an alternative authorizing official. In the past, for different grants in Shelburne, I've seen members of the Selectboard play that role, and unless I'm mistaken, maybe at least once, or if he wasn't actually named, he was at least considered, and that was to put Peter Frankenberg in that position. The way that the resolution was drafted, I put 2 names in for your consideration, and the idea would be to, if you go along with this idea, it could be one or the other. Of course, it could be a third member of the select board. I believe I had put Jamie or Jerry as the options. And then the third position is essentially the administrative position, which is a role that I have fulfilled in the past. Anything that you or Dick want to add? There's a work program, so you get some greater sense of what the actual activities would be. Happy to answer any questions or to step down.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I'm just, and maybe I just missed what you said and confused. So the maximum amount of the grant is for $22,000 and the project budget is $24,500.
Right, and there is a required match to begin with, and because of, we would be having to, we're going with this budget $300 beyond the maximum award, so we are matching because we must match by the percentage, but the budget that we came up with was slightly higher than the maximum award plus the minimum match by, I think, $300.
So that the match is included in that $24,500.
Yes, correct.
Right, okay.
And this type, this type of activity was contemplated in the budget. And it
Would
would,
the deliverables be similar to what?
the
South Burlington
deliverables would
has?
be similar to the report that those excerpts were drawn from.
Okay, so it's a broader report.
Yeah, the report, the complete South Burlington report, I think it's in excess of 50 or 60 pages. I didn't want to give you that much. I'm happy to send the link to anybody that would like it.
Suggest you for 3B.
Sure.
Any discussion?
And what's the timing this happens over the course of the next year?
The resolution that I have ready to pass down has been signed by Jason, and if it had your signatures, these applications are filed electronically. I believe my intention was to file it Friday because the Planning Commission's meeting on Thursday, and it's all done online, and I believe I have everything that's required.
Without further ado, I'll read the resolution. Resolution, fiscal year 19 municipal resolution from Municipal Planning Grant, and you will have to indulge me. Whereas the town of Shelburne is applying for funding as provided for in the fiscal year 19 Budget Act and may receive an award of funds under said provisions, and whereas the Department of Housing and Community Development may offer a grant agreement to this municipality for said funding, and whereas the municipality is maintaining its efforts to provide local funds for municipal and regional planning purposes, or that the municipality has voted at an annual or special meeting to provide local funds for municipal and regional planning purposes. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the legislative body of this municipality enters into and agrees to the requirements and obligations of this grant program, including a commitment to match funds. 2, that the Shelburne Planning Commission recommends applying for said grant as evidenced by the following signature, and Jason has signed. 3A, that interim town manager Lee Crone is hereby designated to serve as the municipal authorizing official, abbreviated M/AO, for the grant electronic application and reporting system, GEARS, and to execute the grant agreement and other such documents as may be necessary to secure these funds. 3B, that Select Board member Jamie Hines is hereby designated to serve as the alternate municipal authorizing official for the grant electronic application and reporting system, and to execute the grant agreement and other such documents as may be necessary to secure these funds. 3C, and finally, that Dean Pierce is hereby designated as the grant administrator, the person with the overall administrative responsibility for the municipal planning grant program activities related to the application and any subsequent grant agreement provisions past this 25th day of September 2018, and the provision is for our 5 signatures. Is there a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
So moved by Colleen,
Second.
seconded by Jamie. Any further discussion or comment among the public? Yeah. Jamie is the named
So
alternate.
it's written here as both you.
We would scratch out, yeah. Any other comment? Hearing none, those approving signify by saying aye,
Aye.
and those opposed, nay. Thank you, and when we get to the point of signing that off, we'll make sure to cross out the,
I just.
oh, I see,
I
you have it,
here.
okay. Thank you. The next item is to, and thank you very much for your time earlier this evening. We appreciate that.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Dean.
The next item is the annual report and update from Charlie Baker, an event we look forward to. And when
Yeah,
Charlie arrives, we'll especially look forward to it. Meantime,
Charlie is running late. He got held up in Colchester giving the report there, so he'll be here when he can. We may want to move on to
that
other
being the
items.
case, I think
Yeah.
with everyone's
John's here.
approval, we'll move on to number 9.
I want to make you sit around.
Meaning no disrespect or discount John for,
No, actually, this is Charlie's show. I'm just here to lend support and go from there. So I
Okay.
can wait for Charlie.
there you go. We'll take up number 9, which are requests for waivers of penalties for late filed Homestead Declaration forms, the background material for which has been provided us.
Oh, and there's one person here that should be here that is not, because we're ahead of schedule.
We are ahead.
We may have
So what about
someone
the-
who is here
the
to speak to
stormwater?
it, but there were 3 in total.
Can't do stormwater?
Good.
Why, how about if we do stormwater?
The stormwater hearing was specifically warned for 8 PM,
Yeah.
just by way of information, so. But there may be one person here, at least for the tax waiver matter. There were 3 in total, but you can hold off on the whole thing and move on if you wish.
I think, imagine this, we're early. In which case, why don't we go to 10?
Sure.
Are we dependent on anyone else for the memo of understanding with the Boy Scouts?
I know that Jim Brangan was planning on being here, but again, we're early, and Ginger is planning on being here as well, ironically.
Well, we could talk about the Red
But
Sox chances in
I'm not-
October, or,
But as far as that memorandum, I'm not aware of any changes from the prior version, simply except that this would be a memorandum of agreement with the Scouts themselves rather than with the Lions Club, who had previously signed on to this.
are we comfortable doing that in Jim's absence, or are we going to be more comfortable waiting on,
Well, if he's coming, let's,
if he's coming?
yeah, if he's making a trip here, I'd say wait.
Well, we could go to 8. I see all the key actors are here, Tom, Chris, Ann. You're prepared? We could use the additional time probably
Yeah.
anyway.
Marty, Alex here? Yeah, guess we'll go.
All right, so in that case, with everybody's indulgence, we'll pen 7 for Charlie's arrival, and we'll move to number 8, which is proposed stormwater ordinance and fee structure, public hearing.
So we need to open the public hearing, right? No.
Before you start,
Safely, sorry.
we need to
I think
formally,
Yes, right?
We
We
need
need
to-
to open the public hearing?
we need to
Yeah.
formally open the public hearing. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Jamie moves, Mary seconds. Any discussion? Those approving signify by saying aye. Aye, and those opposed, nay.
pardon me for a second, because Ann put this on here, and I just need to find out where it is. Item 8.
Yeah. And then also, he told me. He also.
Leave it just like that.
Jerry told me this was completed. This was not.
So thank you for having us here again. I'm Chris Robinson, the Water Quality Superintendent, and with me is Tom DePietro, the Deputy Director of Public Works for South Burlington. And we're going to run through a slideshow which should look fairly familiar to you. You should see it. You've seen it before, most of it before. So basically, the proposed new stormwater ordinance. Before we get into the details, I just want you to know that all of these numbers that we're presenting, majority of them are estimated fairly. We've gotten to where they're fine-tuned pretty well, but we haven't, they're not set yet. So they're still somewhat estimated based on what we have for current data, so. So the big picture, why are we starting the stormwater ordinance? Why are we doing all of this work? And really, it's for the water quality. And I think that's a very important thing to reflect back on as we get into a lot of the details moving forward through this presentation. Is the whole intent of this is really for the water quality aspect for Lake Champlain. So, stormwater. Why is stormwater such a big issue? There's two main components to stormwater. We have stormwater pollution, which is the stuff that the stormwater picks up as it's moving across the ground and flows into the waters of the state. The other is the actual flow itself. This excessive flow that does reach waters of the state causes stream bank erosion and so forth, which carries additional pollutants and stuff downstream. So currently, stormwater is regulated, and it's regulated through 3 different versions. We've got local regulations, which are like our subdivision regulations and stuff. I'll go through that. We also have state regulations, and we have our federal regulations, which is typically referred to as our NEPDES permit, which is the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. So first off, we have Shelburne subdivision regulations. Those are pretty straightforward. We do have some additional regulations that we deal with. We have zoning bylaws, and we also have ordinances at the local level to address stormwater. For state requirements, currently we have 14 permits that we have to maintain. These are just our general permits that we have throughout town. And just to let you be aware of how things change, not just this, but since we've started this whole looking at stormwater, a stormwater ordinance and a stormwater utility, we've been issued a municipal roads general permit from the state. And upcoming, which has not been issued yet, but we're just about there, is we're going to be getting a 3-acre permit also being issued from the state. So that's just to give you an idea of how things are progressing and keep changing and keep getting added to a lot of the regulations we have. And then finally, we have our federal requirements. We get a NEPDES permit, our MS4 permit. And with that MS4 permit, we have a lot of requirements. The main portion of the permit are the 6 minimum standards that we have to reach. And those are listed there. I won't read through all of them, but they typically involve a lot of work, maintenance, street sweeping, a lot of different things that we have to do to meet it. including public education and outreach and stuff like that, so. So the federal requirements of the MS4 permit, one of the requirements it had was a Monroe Brook flow restoration plan. And I'll get into what that is. What is a flow restoration plan? Well, basically, MS4 permits require flow restorations plans for any impaired watershed that we have, a stormwater impaired watershed. For us, it's Monroe Brook. And it's worthwhile also to mention we have McCabe's Brook, which is listed right now, but has not been considered. There's no TMDL listed for it, stuff like that. So we could potentially have McCabe's Brook on this list in the future if we don't do some stuff to try to mitigate that. So the Monroe Brook watershed is approximately 3,500 acres, and it gives you a breakout of the uses of the land in that area. It's that whole outer line, and there's some reference points just to show you where that area is. So the flow restoration plan was kind of the catalyst that pushed the town to start looking at how we're going to address the expenses that are coming down stormwater-wise. There are additional stuff that's been added to the MS4 permit that can potentially create some additional funding, some funding issues. So currently with just the flow restoration plan, we're looking at about a $4.7 million investment. $3 million of that is the town's responsibility, being that it's on town property and so forth. 1.3 million being private owner responsibility, and then $400,000 of a potential shared responsibility.
Chris?
Yes.
Could you break that down a little bit? In
Yep.
terms of why it is what it is? Why, I understand the town piece, but the 1.3 and the 400?
So a lot of these projects that were identified are actually privately owned permits. They're not town permits. They're on private property.
Okay.
And so some kind of a retrofit will have to be done to that. And at the same time, the town will probably be matching, or not matching, but contributing towards some of those costs, which is why we had the 400,000 for the shared responsibility. That, in a prime example I've been using in the past is like Farmstead development. That's a town-owned road, even though that's a private permit. It's a town-owned road, and we're gonna have some shared responsibility in bringing that up to standards. So that's how it's broke out that way. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
So Shelburne stormwater obligations, I have to apologize because this is actually increased to closer to $500,000. But this breaks out the different locations that the costs are being distributed to. Compliance with our state issued permits, those are those 14 permits, the MS4 permits, all that type of stuff. Compliance with the MS4 permit, that's just meeting those 6 minimum measures I spoke to of earlier and all those obligations of the MS4 permit. Then we have, which is also a portion of the MS4 permit, the flow restoration plan, which breaks out to approximately $250,000 a year if you break that $3 million out evenly. It won't be spent evenly that way, but just for terms of ease. Maintenance of existing stormwater infrastructure is approximately $20,000 a year. Also need to make you aware, I don't believe we're maintaining our infrastructure adequately at this point, so that $20,000 number is a little low. I think we're just barely meeting the basic requirements, yes.
What is our stormwater infrastructure? Drainage?
No, yeah, mostly the drain pipes, catch basins, all the piping in the ground, and, which I'll get to a little bit further, but,
Culvert stitching.
yep, culvert stitching, a lot, and some of that, we've got areas in town that are literally crumbling underneath the streets that need some capital improvements done to them, so.
And does the town own any retention ponds or anything like that?
We do. We own, for instance, Boulder Hill. We took that one over.
Athletic fields.
Yep, the athletic
By
fields.
Public Works, there's a sand filter,
Yep.
a variety of things.
Yeah, we've got different treatment practices throughout the town.
And those require maintenance as well?
Correct, correct. Those are part of those 14 permits that we're maintaining now, currently. So next is paying for stormwater requirements. And I'll let Tom take it over from here.
Sure. Yeah, so Tom DePietro, with the City of South Burlington. I've been,
Can you get a?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
you want to hit the plus arrow for me, Chris?
Tried to turn the computer in.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we've been managing the South Burlington Stormwater Program since May 2006. And so in Shelburne recently, in the summer of 2017, the Select Board created the Stormwater Advisory Committee. You see the list of individuals that were on the committee there. I know that Marty and Dick are here. I'm not sure if anybody else has shown up at this point, but a variety of folks were on it, and they were charged with learning about, educating, and advising on the development of a stormwater funding mechanism. So we got to work right away. There were three kind of big categories on how we're going to pay for this that were discussed. The first is kind of the business as usual. So a lot of towns in Vermont pay for their drainage and stormwater needs through the general fund, through property taxes. And that's how Shelburne had been doing it. And I think a lot of folks came into those meetings in their head with, this is the way, we should keep doing it this way. But then as we kept having these meetings and discussions, I think as folks learned more, they came around to some of the equitability and fairness of a fee-based system instead of a tax-based system, and we'll talk more about that. But so anyway, that was the first category. The second was working with assessor, they're the assessor, or maybe assessors around the state, to bill some kind of stormwater fee. After some back and forth with some individuals, members of the committee, found that wasn't feasible. The assessors weren't interested in getting in the business of billing stormwater for a variety of reasons. It's labor intensive, and the measurements of impervious surface and things like that were out of their comfort zone, as well as the complications dealing with stormwater. And then finally, some sort of fee for service, or a utility structure is what we're here to talk about tonight, which is what's in the proposed ordinance. I think you folks have seen this slide before, but I think it's a good reminder. So kind of a tax versus a user fee-based system. And there's pros and cons to each. We're certainly not here to tell you that there's not pros to continuing doing it the way Shelburne is now. It's easier to collect the taxes, right? You don't have to have the additional infrastructure there to do it. You just raise that tax rate to cover the needs, and that pays for the stormwater requirements. There's little added administrative burden. It's somewhat invisible to residents. But the cons are it's more expensive for some properties, and it's not as equitable, perhaps, when compared to the fee system, which we'll talk about. And there's no kind of incentive to manage stormwater under that system. Under a user fee system, yeah, we have it's based on the amount of impervious surface on a property, which is kind of directly related to what's causing the stormwater runoff. And there's sort of the nexus to water quality concept, which we'll get to again in a little bit. So basically, the more stormwater you generate, the larger the fee. And then these funds are dedicated, so where maybe at the end of a year as a general fund, that money gets put back into a pot, money raised through this revenue source stays for that purpose. So it can't be kind of rated for other purposes at the end of the year. And there's ways to tailor the program to fit the community's needs. There's a credit system, provides incentive for reduction of impervious surface. The information we use is other uses. But there's our cons as well. There is an added administrative burden, so you've got to do some calculations and kind of keeping up on that billing system to make sure it's current, and when things change, you update the billing. And there's always that big government perception, right, where it's another program or a government program, and folks tend to not like additional renew programs. And so I think one of the big reasons, we talk about equitability a lot, one of the big reasons the property tax idea may be less attractive is because of tax exempt properties. So this is just a quick overview. The green are the tax exempt properties in town. This doesn't show roads, public roads, because it makes the map really messy, but just know that these properties plus roads are all the tax exempt properties in town. When you break that out by land area on the left here, I want to just draw your attention, I don't have a laser pointer, but kind of the lower right, that non-taxable, the gray piece of the pie. So that's the total area in town by existing land use, and that's the non-taxable. When you look at the impervious area by existing land use, about 32% of the town falls into that non-taxable category. So there's a larger percentage of the impervious surface that's actually located on those non-taxable properties. And this does include roads. That is one of the driving factors behind that, of course. I think folks always ask that, so I want to make that clear, yeah. So again, the basis of this system is it's based on impervious surface. The fee, as proposed, is to deal with stormwater and stormwater management, a lot of the issues that Chris talked about. And we know that impervious surface is what generates that stormwater. So the more impervious surface on a property, the higher the fee. Thinking about it like electricity, right? So the more electricity you use, the more you pay. And there's a rate that's associated with the kilowatt hours there. So the more stormwater pollution or stormwater runoff you generate, the higher the fee. We do this using some kind of newer technology. It's been around for a while now, but very quickly to give a broad overview, it's satellite imagery is used. That satellite imagery reflects different surfaces in different ways. That goes into a computer model, and the computer can tell if something is an impervious surface, like a road or a rooftop or a gravel driveway, versus a lawn or a forest or whatever else you might think of. So we can separate that out with very good accuracy. As the years have gone on, this has gotten a lot better. Now it understands the shape of these different polygons, and it can classify it, and it knows with pretty good accuracy if it's even a road or a rooftop, for example. So we had those three categories we went in the beginning. So this is that stormwater fee category. There were two different options we looked at there. I'm going to go to that second bullet first. There's kind of the intensity of development method. So that sort of utilizes a percentage for each property. So if you're falling, let's just say a 1 to 20% range of impervious surface, if that's how much is on your property, you'd be billed, 10 cents a square foot versus if you were in I forget the range, I used this example, about 40 to 60, you might be billed 12 cents and up. And there's even it can be, I guess I should say, a small amount for vacant lots, even if that's what folks wish to do. There were a variety of reasons we didn't go with this method, or it was viewed as less favorable. And we talked about this a little in the Stormwater Advisory Committee. The categories are pretty broad. It's actually more labor intensive to figure it out because you've got to measure with pretty good accuracy the pervious versus impervious. And I'm reading from an EPA memo now. This method might also discourage urban infill and inadvertently encourage sprawl. So it just some challenges with that method. So what the committee settled on was the ERU, or Equivalent Residential Unit method. This is a method that's used by South Burlington, Williston, Colchester, and Burlington. All the other communities that have stormwater fees kind of use this method. And very simply, it's based on a square footage of impervious surface found on a typical single-family residential property. I'll say SFR because that's less of a mouthful. But so the SFR property, and then non-single-family residential properties, or NSFR, how I'll refer to them, they're billed based on the amount of impervious surface, but using that base billing unit. And we'll get into some more of the details here. But what we've done so far is we've taken all the property in Shelburne using GIS, sorted out whether it was single-family residential or not, and then figured out the median or the average impervious surface on those single-family residential properties. That comes out to about 4,500 square feet. So that's your equivalent residential unit, right? It would be about that 4,500 square feet. And so using that value, we estimate there's about 7,400 billable ERUs in Shelburne. So again, about 2,100 single-family residential properties. Those will all pay one ERU, as it's proposed right now, and we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. And then all the non-single-family residential property, there's a 1,000 or so of those. I just calculated that the other day. But those equal about roughly 3,300 ERUs. And then roads, town-owned roads are about 2,000 ERUs. So there's a good chunk of impervious surface and kind of the billable ERUs under this method that, again, are related to roads. And so Chris has done some work, and I and others have helped to put together an estimated budget for our Shelburne Stormwater program. And we've come out roughly about $516,000 annual is what the program would cost. So using that rough figure and the rough figures I just went over, if we know there's 7,410 ERUs in Shelburne, it comes out to about $5.81 a month is the rough rate. So every single family proposed, or roughly, would pay about $5.81 a month. And that's about $60, $70 a year, would kind of be the cost for your average, for any of your single-family residential properties. Just a table showing regional rates. I think Shelburne falls sort of right where I would expect it to when you kind of look at the magnitude of work on these different communities and cost. So you see, South Burlington and Burlington. I'll draw your attention to that last column because that kind of normalizes these costs by 1,000 square feet of impervious surface. So, in South Burlington, it's about $2.53. Burlington's a little higher now. Williston's about $1.06, Colchester $1. Shelburne's coming out to roughly $1.24. And St. Albans, who they just started their fee in July, they're about 83 cents right now.
And I do want to point out that everything up there is based off from the fiscal year 19's information that we have, and what our proposal is for fiscal year 20. So the number we have for Shelburne is actually ahead another fiscal year. So whatever increases these other municipalities would have is not being calculated, because we don't know what that number is.
And so kind of circling back to some of the main points at the beginning here. So what the utility is proposing here is a fee. It's not a tax. It's not based on property value. It's a fee for kind of the service of managing stormwater. So the more stormwater your property generates, the more stormwater there is for the town to manage per these flow restoration plans and other issues. And so it's important that when you have a fee-based system, that there's some sort of relationship to what the fee is being charged for. So you couldn't reasonably go and say, okay, well, the amount of drinking water this property uses, we're going to base your stormwater fee on how much drinking water, the cubic feet of water you consume, because there's no direct relationship there. But impervious surface does have a direct relationship to the amount of stormwater runoff generated. And that's a really important point. Without having that kind of that connection or that nexus, these types of systems can be vulnerable to a legal challenge of some sort. So this has been kind of proven throughout the country, and all the systems in Vermont that have proposed this system have been successful. And I know there's been some discussion, certainly at the last meeting, talking about flat rates for residential properties. So kind of drilling down, just looking at the SFR properties, there's different size properties in Shelburne, and they have different amounts of impervious surface on them. What's proposed right now is just a single category and one flat rate of that $5.81 roughly on our current budget. But it's certainly possible to create a second tier. So if you look at sort of a graph, or there's a nice curve where the majority of properties are, and then it comes down, and then there's a lot of properties, residential properties, on this end of that curve, or the far right side, right? Because they have a lot of impervious surface. And so folks felt that it's just maybe not fair, or it could be made more fair, I guess I should say, if there was a second tier added where those folks would build a little bit more each month for the impervious surface on their properties, because they do have a much larger amount. I've included this up here. I think we'll go back to, I love flowcharts, so I know a lot of folks don't share my love of flowcharts, but this is an easy way if you were trying to figure out how your property would be billed. If you're single-family residential, you go to the right side of the chart. Duplexes, triplexes, split the fee. If you're non-single-family residential, the first thing we would do is calculate the percent imperviousness of your property. So let's just say you were 28% impervious. We use this tier factor of 25% or 0.25. That avoids us having to get it down to kind of the square foot level of accuracy, which would be really time consuming. Administratively, staff would spend a lot of time. So we use that value in the middle there as part of our calculation. And then it's pretty straightforward. You take your tier factor. So in my example here, 0.25 times the total property area. You divide it by that roughly 4,500 square feet we used earlier. And you come out with that's your number of ERUs times a monthly rate. And then credits are applied. And we have some examples of this. So I'm going to keep going past this because I know there's a lot of information on this slide. But what the current ordinance proposes is credits for non-single family residential properties. Those properties can receive credits up to 70% for in a variety of different categories. We can talk about that more if you want, but one of the big ones there is actually treating the stormwater that their property generates. So if you provide treatment per state of Vermont requirements, you can receive a credit on your fee. And folks have to apply for credits. It's just not assumed that you get them if you have one of these properties. And so here's just a couple examples of billing. So the first here is AutoMaster. We tried to pick a property that folks may be familiar with. And so you can see that, hopefully you can see the kind of there's yellow property lines, and then we put a purple or black dash line around the AutoMaster property there. So the whole property's 892,000 square feet roughly. It's got about 240,000 square feet of impervious surface. So it's about 27% impervious. So it falls into that 0.25, that tier factor. And then, we've established again, the average square footage on a residential lot's about 4,476. So that's the bullet second to the bottom there. You determine your ERUs, you multiply that total property area by the tier factor, divide it by the ERU value, and you come out to 50 ERUs. And so again, it would be about $5.81 times 50 ERUs. That would be the monthly fee for this particular property. And just another example, this was it Thai Lane?
Yeah.
I forget the name of the condo. This is a condo, a small condo association. So again, they have about 130,000 square feet, the whole property, about 38,000 square feet of impervious surface. They fall into that tier factor range of where we use the 0.25. So we do the math, 131,000 times 0.25 divided by the 4,476. It comes out to 8 ERUs. There's 16 units here, so each of these units would pay half an ERU a month. So half a $5.81 would be their monthly bill. I think one last note we wanted to make before we open it up for some Q&A was that the town did receive an ecosystems restoration grant from Vermont DEC. So a lot of the work we're doing to set this up will be covered by the grant, $25,000 in startup costs. And that's legal review, billing software, development of outreach materials, I think some of which you guys saw in previous weeks, and assistance from myself and maybe others that we may bring in to help us with kind of customer service or, questions and things like that as they come up. So I think, did you want to go over this, Chris? I don't know. Or we'd have that there for-
No. It's too difficult to read there.
Yeah. So I think I'll stop talking at this point and see if any folks have questions or comments. Chris and I will do our best to answer them.
Mary?
Well, first, I think this represents a whole lot of work, and I just once again feel the need to say thank you to the Stormwater Advisory Committee for all this work and your work as well. I would say that I personally would favor that intermediate or that two-tiered approach to the single-family unit, because that would soften, I think, some of the concerns that were expressed at the last, well, it wasn't a hearing, but the last report we got from the committee about just taking the average home of the 4,400 square feet. I know, believe it or not, I live across the road from a home that's 25,000 square feet. It's actually more, should be taxed like an institution, really, or non-residential. It looks like a hotel, actually. So I would favor that particular home that is so large and has such a long driveway, having a slightly different tier. So that's what I would feel would be more equitable. And that's my only comment, and thank you again. Really impressive.
Yeah, I'll second that quickly because that's a similar concern I raised. We have a two-tier. I think there's a qualitative difference,
And would that,
magnitude differences with beyond, sorry?
would that increase the cost a lot, do you think? That wasn't addressed in your presentation, I'm sorry.
I think that's something that would have to be discussed maybe with the committee or among staff, however it's decided to move forward, is where to draw that line. I've thought about it a little bit, certainly, and of others, and kind of where you put that line, I don't think there's there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's where you create that line, which makes me want to make sure we get it right and have some good reasoning behind it. And then once you draw the line, what are you charging the folks that are kind of above that line, right?
Right.
How many ERUs? So I think that's something we'd have to think about it a little more. I don't have a proposal at the
Right.
moment for what I would even recommend. I don't know, Chris, if you've,
No, the only small administrative stuff after that is just monitoring those people that are on either side of the line, right? If they remove impervious surfaces because they get rid of a tennis court, make it back to a lawn, or somebody adds a garage that they didn't have on their property and it pushes them over. So it's that, trying to keep up with the changes that
Yeah.
are happening on a residential basis is based off building permits that go through planning and zoning office. So there is some additional administrative
Yeah.
and checkups that have to be done.
Sure.
Versus residential is residential and you don't have to deal with it, so.
We can assume those changes would be monitored in the case of all properties.
But
Would they monitor with the,
Well, just the ones that would be close to that, whatever line you draw, are the ones that would have to be monitored.
so with a single with a, just one category or one tier, you don't have to evaluate the impervious surface
Right.
necessarily. After you've
Right.
established your ERU square footage,
Right.
you don't really look at those again, and so that's
Right.
2,095 properties that just have that flat rate, flat bill. Because the balance you're trying to achieve here is a fairness and an equitability,
Yeah.
without introducing sort of an administrative and management burden on staff, because you want this money to go towards water quality and solving water quality issues. You don't want it to go towards somebody sitting in an office or out in the field measuring the exact square footage of every walkway or something like that, so.
You
know-
get to the point of diminishing returns.
Exactly. So two categories, certainly there's some feelings of fairness there that helps with. Once you start getting 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know, you've kind of lost some of the
so
ease of management.
the question that I had in that, in the, I can't remember where it was suggested that, maybe the cutoff would be like an acre. Now, is that an acre of parcel or an acre of impervious surface?
I think, I'm trying to remember the example. I assume it would be impervious surface. I don't know, we wouldn't use the total parcel area for anything. It's impervious
say something?
surface-based fee.
And you want
Yeah, we had looked at what Colchester is doing. Colchester is the only other municipality that has a second tier. And they found that there were about 30 properties in Colchester that were really there was much more impervious surface than the average. I can't remember exactly what the percentage was. So they made a decision to charge any single-family residential that was above 1 acre of impervious surface, and to charge them a flat rate of 10 ERUs. So it's still a flat rate, which makes it very administratively easy to administer, other than what Chris and Tom mentioned, which is, watching for any changes along that line. We looked at our numbers, and if we did exactly what Colchester is doing, that would be about 12 properties that would fall into that category.
But that was the gist of the comment. This is acreage-based, so you're likely to be monitoring changes in acreage that are so extraordinary as to require, additional administrative costs. But the half acre, from the half acre analysis emerged 90 properties. Correct? 89
I don't think we did that analysis, did we?
from the analysis that I have.
You're going to be looking at something we don't have in front of us that we've put together.
It's on the next to last page of the August 28th document, in which case it
Yes,
notes,
okay, I've got what you're
it
looking at.
notes that SFR properties containing greater than 1/2 acre were 89 or 4.4%.
Okay.
In my view, that's
I see what
4.4% to the good of equity.
Right, so I mean.
And it's
could there-
understandable that to go granular, as the phrase is getting to be common, and add a third and fourth and fifth tier is a point of no return, no economic return. I understand that. But I thought the first tier was a distinction that we could afford and was important in the sense of more equity than a single.
But
So
you
as
did
far
have,
as-
sorry.
So I just have a quick question. As far as impervious surface, then like a large cow barn would also be considered towards that half acre?
Impervious surface is impervious surface. There's no distinction made by land use. if that-
Yeah, because somebody mentioned this to me and they said, you should be careful because it's easy to think that you're making it more equitable because it's affecting the very, very wealthy in the community and therefore they should carry a higher burden. But this will also affect farmers.
Potentially, if they're single-family residential properties with a barn like you've described, they may fall into that category. And I'll mention very quickly, Williston ran into an issue where there's a lot sort of on the main road and then a long driveway on that lot that serves a lot behind it, but it's in an easement. So that impervious surface is associated with that front lot, even though there only may be a small home there. And there were instances in kind of their tiered system that they abandoned after a short time where folks like that were getting thrown into the higher tier for impervious surface that actually served, the neighbor or the other property. So there's no perfect solution in that respect, yeah.
The only thing, in one of your slides, it did note that, it could be either 2 or 3 tiers. And so it would be interesting to know, as you say, where that cutoff, to at least have that model of figuring out potentially what 3 tiers would look like in addition to 2, if that's the way we would go.
Why don't we start with general comments from the public first, and then we'll return to the board as a hearing. Is there anyone in the public who'd like to comment or discuss Chris and? Yes, Linda, please.
Linda Riel, Falls Road. I'm just voicing my opinion in support of, as you just discussed, a 2-tiered program to make things a bit more equitable. So thank you for speaking about that.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, please. Sorry, Tom, the gentleman behind you is.
Hi, Tom Denenberg, Shelburne Museum. I wanted to focus on that slide for a second, which is the green space, and point out that while I thank the committee for a lot of hard work this year, the outcome is particularly onerous on Shelburne Farms and Shelburne Museum. And these are the organizations that contribute greatly to the quality of life in Shelburne. We're still not exactly sure what the burden is on the museum, but it goes from something like $400 a year to $8,500 a year. And I understand that the town doesn't want to add administrative costs on the town side by adding a position or part of a position to look at this through the tax base or the tax code. But I think we all need to understand that that's a fundamental or material part of a position at Shelburne Museum. So that may be a position we don't fund next year if we're spending that money. So it's a little bit like my daughter's little beanbag where you squeeze the beans out of one side of the beanbag and it goes into another. We're either taking this money out of somewhere in the town, and to focus on raising these funds from Shelburne Farms and Shelburne Museum seems like that's the wrong way of doing business in this town, because I do think this town is different from the other towns that are used as the comparisons. There's a term of art, nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit, which is what we are, and I assume the farms are. So when we see a green diagram that says tax exempt, we are tax exempt for a reason. We are tax exempt because we contribute $14 million to the local economy, because we educate 10% of the Vermont school children statewide, and we draw 100,000 people a year to this town as an educational institution. So there's a reason why we have nonprofits in this society, in this country, and in Shelburne. And I understand a utility is different from a tax. A utility creates a nexus between a service rather than just going into the general pool. However, this looks very much like a tax to a nonprofit director, which is what I am. So I want us to be very, very careful with how we move forward. I know I have a number of questions as to the methodology of this. I see the Automaster has a large tarmac parking lot, and we love the Automaster. And they're paying about $3,000. We have gravel roads and historic buildings, and we're paying maybe $8,500. The idea that impermeable is impermeable, I understand it's an engineering solution. but I think there's more nuance that could be brought into that discussion than a paved commercial parking lot versus a 501c3 nonprofit with historic buildings. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Tom?
Can we get, just to address one of Tom's concerns before?
Sure, would you
Tom,
mind,
please speak.
Tom?
No, Tom, please come up, but I
Yeah.
want to make sure we do get into a little
Oh,
detail on the
absolutely.
credits
Yeah, absolutely.
so that maybe Ann or Tom can help flesh that out a little bit on the credit manual, and if there might be opportunities to sort of,
There certainly are, yeah. So in that credit manual, there's like I mentioned earlier, treating stormwater to the state standard gets you a credit. There's an education credit proposed in there. There's an agricultural credit in there.
Why don't we return to that? When
Yeah, if we could.
One of three Toms is,
I didn't
we have three.
use this, Tom. We were-
Why don't you go ahead, Tom, and then we'll return to that question.
Tom Tompkins, Falls Road. I think I'm going to agree with the director of the museum and say that we probably ought to put the onus on those that can afford to pay, and that would be the wealthy who have the large homes with the tennis courts. I think we ought to do the simplest thing, which is base it on, have a tax, base it on the grand list or whatever, and that way I don't think anyone can raise a fuss, no one can argue, and it's just the way it is. It's the town's responsibility to pay for the stormwater upgrades and whatever, and so it's up to the taxpayer, I think, to fund the town.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, sir.
My name's also Tom.
You're too late.
can't make this up.
I'm sorry. I'm Tom Nold, and I'm part of the staff at Shelburne Farms. And as Mary said and Tom Denenberg said, we also appreciate all the work you've done for this. And the committee, it's a lot of volunteer time that's gone into that, and we appreciate that. But I do have a couple of clarifying questions and then some comments about being a nonprofit as well. Under your funding methods discussed, one of the bullets said that property tax is a less reliable source of funding. I would think that the property tax would be one of the most reliable sources of funding in the town. Could you comment on that?
I'd be happy to.
Sure.
So, I guess our concern.
And you want to identify?
Sorry, Ann Janda, Director of Administration. Okay, so the reason why we have that perspective is because with the tax rate, you could have a year where there are other costs and a select board could decide to cut stormwater rather than other programs. And so that's what, it could be more volatile in that regard.
Thank you. My other question is, I did the back of the envelope calculation, and the farm would be charged about $23,000 for this, which is very significant to our budget. But another question is, a year ago, the same presentation came out, and it said the single-family residential properties would pay $42.85 a year. This year, it's $69.72, which is a 64% increase. Now, is there something fundamental in the calculation that caused a 64% increase, or are the costs fluctuating? What might be the cause of that large increase in 1 year?
So the number now is 581, is what the proposed, and it still hasn't been refined yet.
Right.
A lot of the numbers that we provided in the beginning were based off from 2016 data and stuff, it was
2010.
2010 data. So we knew that just to try to give an idea and a ballpark, and really how the fee structure would be set up, not really to look at the specific numbers at that point. And we were very hesitant at that point to actually, didn't really want to provide numbers, but there were members of the committee that really wanted just put some numbers up there so people had an idea what kind of ballpark we're talking about, whether or not, you know, one ERU was gonna be $5 a month, or was it gonna be $25 a month, or $2,000 a month, so. So just to give an idea where it is. Now that we've kind of gone through and actually put together, it's a very, very rough draft of the budget, we're coming up with that 581. That's not set in stone, that's still just a proposal. If this all gets passed and stuff, it's then the select board's, putting their final stamp and setting what that actual rate is, and that's when we've had the budget discussions and stuff like that. So that can even change the 581 that's being proposed now, so.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing is you're getting closer, but you're still not sure what the
Correct.
impact on nonprofits like us might
Correct.
be if this ordinance
Correct.
goes through. Okay, thank you. So speaking a little more specifically about nonprofits and more specifically about Shelburne Farms, there was a chart that you showed the percentage of impermeable surfaces by nonprofits versus non-nonprofits, and I suspect Shelburne Farms is contributing greatly to that. Here were the pie charts with the yellow right there. Oops, back up once. There you go. Or the gray from 19% by total area and 32% non-taxable by impervious surfaces. As those of you who know the farm and have been there, and most of you have, we have a lot of very large barns, a lot of rainwater coming off those roofs, but they're also surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of acres of open land and forests that are intentionally left open and intentionally cared for a lot of those reasons. So your comment was the more stormwater you generate, the more it costs the town, and therefore you have a direct relationship to paying that cost. And that's part of the equitable side of your presentation, which I understand. But when you have a barn out in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of acres, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to imagine that stormwater getting to your stormwater system at all. And I would just ask if that could be taken into consideration, if there could be some kind of exemption, if you will, not for every little roof on our property, that's for sure, but for very large roofs like the breeding barn, the farm barn, and so forth, which I believe are substantially creating that differential on your pie chart. So I would ask if there be some consideration for large surfaces that do not create or do not contribute to stormwater, such as the farm barn and the breeding barn and other large farms of a similar nature. I would also ask if you could have a consideration for capping the fees for a nonprofit. There might be another tier. You've got a couple of different tiers of not taxable units because you're calling it a fee, but could nonprofits be a third, such that we could get a little bit of a break from the set rate so that we're not paying the same as the commercial folks around town because of what Tom said very well about being nonprofits. And I'm aware of the credits. As an educational institution, we could get 10% off and appreciate that. And as an agricultural institution, we could have some more credits. But if the base could be lowered so that the credits could be taken off a lower base, Shelburne Farms would very much appreciate that consideration as well. And then I think the last thing is, again, if a nonprofit could be somehow treated the same as a residential with a flat fee, maybe based on the number of residences or whatever at the farm or elsewhere. That might be another idea or suggestion for nonprofits. So I just thank you for listening to these ideas, but if we could be given in other nonprofits some kind of a consistent break versus the commercial entities in town, it'd be greatly appreciate that consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other comments? I'm going to add one. A number of weeks ago, a gentleman by the name of Robert Platt sent an email to me detailing his concerns about the equity of a fee-based program. And I will enter his comments, which are quite lengthy, into the record to be sure they're entered into the record. The summary is by now familiar to many of us who've been in these discussions, in that he felt it was most important to adopt a fee that was as equitable as possible for the town, and recognized some of the substantial divisions in property and wealth that characterize us. So I will submit that for the record as he sent it to me. Now, I know Josh has a number of questions to address. Do you want to can we return to the whole question of credit as a feature that's come up now twice, and Jamie referred to it? Do you want to, how about we jump into that?
I can refer to it as I go through these, or I can go to it now, whatever you'd like.
Then why don't you do that?
Okay, well, I go through just on the credit
We
area.
want to start with that, and then we'll move into the other.
Sure. The issue of credit, and this relates primarily to the single family versus the non-single family, because I think it was very well stated in the presentation about the importance of education, the importance of mitigating stormwater runoff. And I think there are a lot of homeowners, if the group that is the single family, that would be very interested in this. And if you go back to this chart, you can see that certainly residential property is a significant part. And by sort of not creating any mechanism for residential or single-family residences to access a credit of some way, in some way of reducing their stormwater, their fees, and more importantly, encouraging them to do that, I think you can have a significant impact by encouraging people to do that. And that is why I asked Juliana last week to come in and talk about the Blue program, because I think that is somewhat of a no-cost mechanism for the town to allow single-family residents to work towards a credit on their fee, and also encourage the more localized and probably pretty easily accomplished mechanism or mitigation features that would go a long way to decreasing some of that runoff in that. It's hard for me to sort of separate out completely that you have a significant chunk of land or of impervious surface that is not eligible for credits versus non-single family, which can reduce their fees up to 70%. So again, it's that equity kind of thing. So I think for what it's worth, even though certainly details would have to be worked out, I think incorporating the Blue certification program into the ordinance itself would be at least a first step in trying to encourage single-family residences to do their bit to reduce stormwater. So that's the pitch on that end.
Add to it, anybody?
I think it's a good idea, too. I think the Blue certification's a good idea. I just, I think we'd really want to pressure test the administrative costs of that, if there is any ongoing Yeah, if Blue would do it,
There
then
are
that's the
other
easy
programs,
solution, I
too.
agree. Whatever the
Yeah.
alternative,
Like, you know,
we
yeah.
should make those available, right? Blue or similar.
Yeah, I wasn't focusing just on that. That was one that I was aware of. It seemed to fit if there are others. Yeah, as an example, if there are others. But I think separating out the single-family residences have no access to a credit really discounts our goal of making the community sensitive to the stormwater issues and allowing them to participate in whatever way they can.
Tom or Ann, do you want to respond to, what was the rationale for limiting the credit to NSFR?
Tracking it.
Remind us, is it the administrative burden?
So again, that's a big part of it. And I'll use rain barrels as an example, because I think that's a common one. So everybody's familiar with a rain barrel. You put a rain barrel in your downspout. I think that has incredible value for education, support of stormwater management programs. But to treat the runoff from that half section of roof, my colleague did a calc, you need like 20 rain barrels, right? So I think it's really important and valuable from the educational aspect. But to meet the requirements that Chris spoke about in the beginning of our presentation here, that doesn't quite get you there. And then you have the issue of ongoing maintenance of the fee, as far as somebody, town staff, having to go and check to make sure they're using that rain barrel properly. And it's just not reasonable to ask staff every time it rains to make sure, go around, did you empty that rain barrel before it rains again, or you continuing to use it? So it's sort of a management issue. We did discuss some ideas about how to incorporate a program, Blue or like Blue, in future years, to make that opportunity available to the residential properties that were interested. But I think to make it a credit system, I think that could encourage an enormous amount of additional work that I personally wouldn't be comfortable with, just kind of seeing how these credit programs go.
But if Blue's going to be managing that program and that certification program, that was what I thought was the attractive part, is they're taking, it takes that administrative burden off of the town per se. And I agree, we're talking about economies of scale, so to speak, in stormwater, but I think starting with something like that sends the message that we want everybody to participate in this kind of exercise.
I'm going to pause just 1 minute, because several people who had business with us, not knowing that we have become so efficient that we are running a half hour ahead these days, and who were led to believe by the agenda, which times are approximate, although noted, they are taken to heart. We have moved to, as you are hearing, the public hearing on the stormwater ordinance, which we would like to continue with your indulgence. I know Jim Brangan has had to go home with his 2 youngsters.
No, that was.
No. I thought you were 20 years younger. In any case, that shows you. But we'll ask the indulgence of the several of you who are here for earlier matters and earlier business, who have the benefit of learning, as we are tonight, about the ins and outs of a stormwater ordinance. So we thank you, and we appreciate your patience.
I wondered, does it make sense maybe to continue the hearing?
I think
If there's enough,
I think
do you want to
once-
continue?
I'd like to have Josh enter his remaining questions, at least by topic and in general,
topic.
and then we probably will.
But you don't want to get into a discussion on each of
I
those.
think our goal probably at this point is to continue it, but to give as much information as we can at this point, to expect responses ahead of the next.
Well, and I like to think is the questions I asked about the ordinance were very well answered, and I really appreciate the effort that went into that, because that did really clarify a lot of the questions that I had. So what I sent to you all were essentially the discussion questions for the board to talk about based on the information that we received. So I'm not sure if it's that worthwhile to just sort of highlight them without getting into that discussion, unless we wanted to go through that whole process again next time.
And
So-
you think these are pretty much specific to us rather than?
Yes.
Any question of further staff input? I know some of them are.
Well, I suspect some staff input might be worthwhile, but I think what I've tried to do is phrase them as items that I think the select board needs to discuss. As to, there may be questions that could be asked, but I think I tried to narrow down based on the excellent input that eliminated a lot. I think there were 11 items. No, 15, sorry. And some of them are fairly simple. Just saying that with the thing is, I think that the ordinance might be improved by adding this part. So I'm open to however you'd like to proceed.
Well, I think we'll put this in Lee's hands in terms of preparation for the continued hearing. And it gives guidance to that discussion. A good deal of tonight's has been wonderful and thorough and precise, and I don't know that we would need to necessarily repeat that. And there may well be questions in the public, having now had a hearing tonight. There certainly is an opportunity to address the question about nonprofit. And
I mean,
you know,
if you'd like, I can. Well, I'm trying to avoid duplication of effort here.
sure.
And so the question is, do you want me to go through these now, or?
I think if you
Later.
identify them by subject, Josh,
Okay,
and
all
then
right.
we'll put it in Lee's hands and ask Jamie finally for a comment. He was the liaison to the Stormwater Advisory Committee.
Okay, that's fine, however you'd like to proceed. Okay, my first comment really has to do with and the way I've approached this is with the recognition that the adoption of this stormwater ordinance will be a big change for the town. I mean, it really creates a whole new entity, a whole new utility. And so I think it's incumbent on the select board to really make sure that we're comfortable with all of the ins and outs of this. And so with that in mind, one of the things that this ordinance does do is create a stormwater appeals board, which handles any of the questions about how it's applied. And so one of the questions was, does the select board want to create another quasi-judicial board? And the aspects of that is, the suggestion was that a town staff member would be a member of that board, which seems different from any other, certainly any of the quasi-judicial boards. And so the question was, should a staff member be on a quasi-judicial board, or is that something, or should that person serve as a staff member? And in that regard, it's suggested as a 3-member board. Is that sufficient? How do we determine what the optimum number of people sitting on that board? And one of my questions was, is there any appeal from that board? And the thing was, that goes through a normal Rule 75 appeal process. And so the question for discussion was, does the select board feel that's sufficient? The next one was very simple about, there's a lot of language about water courses and channels that are stormwater, and that we should feel that the public really knows where these things are, and so having adequate mapping tools for that. There was another item under fees, which this is an area where we might get some input about clarification about fees, stormwater permit fees, which I don't think was answered that well. We can move on from that. The interesting thing that I noted were the topographic features that are part of a water course may not really be obvious to many people, and a lot of people probably have put stuff in those water courses which from this ordinance they would be required to be removed. And so I think the language about how that is done and how that's enforced really should be at least examined, because I hate to see differential enforcement of that, and I'm not quite sure how to get around that issue. But in keeping with that, I had a question about marking any of the stormwater system, and it was suggested that the damage needs to be done in a malicious, willful, or negligent manner, which I think is entirely appropriate, but that language should be in the ordinance.
We
Okay.
had a good discussion of fee.
Yeah, right. The fee. That doesn't really account for fee. That's. You mean the next item was
I'm
on-
moving.
Right. I thought you were talking about the last. Yeah. No. The next part of it is the fee. Again, goes back to comments that I made last week, and the suggestion, and I think this was also brought up in some of the public comments, is I understand that the fee-based system that is being suggested is work for other towns. Whether Shelburne is more or less exactly like all those other towns needs to be addressed. And one of my suggestions was that we do need to link impervious surface to cost, but it would be really interesting for us to look at the interaction between size of parcel, which probably is related to assessed value, and if there is a relationship between assessed value and impervious surface. Because if there is, then you have the possibility of using assessed value as another metric to assess that fee that gets away from the flat fee system, which I think even with the tiered system still has problems, because as you said, Jerry, if the second tier only has 20 properties, that's a pretty limited.
89.
No, that was the third tier, I thought you said, the half acre. Half acre versus an acre. And so, yes, but still, I go back to the comment I made last week, or last meeting, that a $10,000 property probably is really different from $1 million property. And making sure that we can equitably assess the costs based on those differences, I think is really important. So looking at that relationship, I'm not saying, it's just a gut feeling there's that relationship. It may be different from what has already been done, and obviously there's a lot of work that has been done in the fee structure so far. It's work for other towns. My question is, are there other ways of doing this? I've already talked about the blue certification. I've talked about the Stormwater Advisory Board. The education credits has mattered. The language in the ordinance at the moment seems to be very, at least targeted toward school-based education. Whether or not the case that's how I read it. Whether or not that's the case, so I think the language could probably be expanded to clarify the breadth of institutions that could gain educational presence. It doesn't have to be necessarily a primary educational institution. It could be others. I had some comments about sort of what I considered somewhat broad-based definitions that I thought language could be added to define limits or timeframes rather than things like promptly removed and unreasonable delay. Even though I know these are often used, as someone who spent a lot of time trying to enforce regulations, I find the more defined they are, the easier they are to enforce. There was a question about judicial bureau that can be easily clarified by change in language. With the one section on stormwater mitigation fee, if a parcel owner does not want to do the stormwater treatment practices that they use, then they have to pay a fee. I'd like to ensure that the fees that are charged for that actually go to managing the stormwater on that parcel, or it's some way of making sure that that's just not put into the, if it has that specific purpose, it should be used for that purpose. And I suggested we should have some additional discussion on the items that you had raised previously, and that overall, I think the important thing, and I think we're getting to that, is that as I started with, this will be a significant change in the way the town does business, and I think for a ordinance of this magnitude, we really need to think about the process by which this kind of information makes it to the select board. We had talked earlier about the comprehensive plan, which has gone on for a long time. The select board hasn't had the information on the stormwater ordinance for a very long time, and I think it would have benefited our understanding and our discussion if we had learned more about all of the potential impacts 6 months ago, maybe. And I think we should just think about this process in the future for ordinances, that we really have to do if we're doing due diligence as a select board, to carefully review the policies that we are going to impose on the town, then rather than rushing things through, or at least, having limited time to have discussions both with staff and with committees that are assigned, I think that would really benefit the process.
Thank you, Josh. Are there any other comments? I'm going to propose that we continue the public hearing to time and date certain, October 9th, which is our next meeting at 8 o'clock.
So moved.
Moved by Colleen,
Second.
seconded by several people. We'll choose Mary. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. We thank you, all of you who came for the hearing and were willing to engage it sooner than later. We thank everybody who is now waiting for their turn, and we appreciate the amount of input. It seems to me that Ann and Tom and Chris, you've got a good bunch of comments and some things to be thinking about before we come back.
Is there anything that you would like us to research in the meantime? Do you want us to look to the half-acre tier?
That half-acre tier number 2 is the continuing interest of mine, at least. I think Josh has raised a couple of interesting questions, one of quasi-judicial, which is, and maybe something of the experience. I think perhaps Lee, and this would be Lee's to gather up and give some structure to, maybe the question of nonprofit treatment. There may be some thoughts on your behalf as to precedent for that, the distinction of nonprofit in terms of singular treatment. I don't know that we're going to comment on the value of nonprofits, specific or general, except to the extent of a distinguishing class.
Okay.
And others.
I would certainly like to see the, if possible, the graph of impervious surface versus assessed value. I'm, the only reason I've suggested this because I know the impervious surface data exists and I know the assessed value data exists. So it seems like that should be a fairly straightforward.
It's not straightforward. Those databases do exist, but they're separate. So
Okay.
we've got our parcel data with impervious surface on it. We've got the town's general fund information in an Excel database. There's also a utility billing database. But to this point, those are not matched up on a one-to-one basis. So the task that we've been holding off on that would answer a lot of the questions about what's the exact dollar value of this cost means that somebody's got to sit down and spend many hours combining those databases. Once that were done, we could produce the kind of graph you want, but that is not we've got it all here, we just need to make you a graph type of activity. So I guess I think was the response in the memo, we'd want to make sure that's going to have some impact
Right.
on the select board's decision because there may be a weak correlation there in 0.6, right? What does that information do for you? So before we did that analysis, we wanted to make sure, or I personally wanted to make sure that it was really valuable to the select board.
We can
I think
hold
it'd
that
be,
off.
I think it'd be
hold that
useful
off.
for us to leave that in Lee's hands, and he can advise us to
Yeah.
happily.
Or we could, I think it's probably relevant to the discussion that we may have in the continuance of whether it's worthwhile looking at other options.
Could
Okay.
we maybe look at, one ask from me would be if there might be a way to think creatively about phasing in nonprofits, or maybe the committee could put their thinking cap on and work with Tom, and Chris is here. I don't know if that was discussed in
Right, so
in
one
SWAC
of the
committee
things
meetings,
that the
but-
Stormwater Advisory Committee did discuss is this issue of, like in South Burlington, it was a lot easier to have tax exempt properties pay because the biggest tax exempt property was the airport.
Right.
Here it's a very different situation. It's Shelburne Farms and Shelburne Museum, which we all love, and we don't want to penalize them at all. And so one thing that the committee did do and spent a lot of time on was the credit manual and offering up to 70% credit instead of every other town, every other municipality only offers up to 50% credit. So that was one thing we thought could really soften the blow. The other stormwater utilities really advised us against any exemptions. Their reasoning for that is that it creates a slippery slope. Once you do one exemption, you have to justify why you can't do another exemption, and then it can just be sort of exemption free fall.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would characterize it as an exemption, more of a short-term
Just a class.
runway so that they're able to adjust their operating budgets accordingly,
Yeah,
right? So it's
and
not a
so
full
that
stop.
was one of the things we did discuss, and is really an option that's up to you guys. Is that we don't have to approve the 580 ERU rate. The 580 brings us up to exactly where we should be. That cost could be phased in. Some of the capital funding could
Be
be
deferred.
lowered, or put off for a couple of years. It could be a 2 or 3 year ramp up to the appropriate ERU rate, which could really soften the blow for the
Well, I think
larger
I think
properties.
a brief to this point, excuse me, Tom, but I think a brief to this point in preparation for the next meeting would probably be very helpful. And before I return to you, Tom, as a last comment, I noted that under the expenditures, the rate determination was based on an annual capital project input of 170K, but in the more detailed sheet, it shows considerably more than that. So I'll leave you with a question as to why those figures wouldn't be the same.
Just to take a look at that, if you look under the capital projects, under the flow restoration plan projects, it's 170K.
How am I missing that?
Right underneath that highlighted
Right?
capital, take the second one.
I see, wrong column.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Tom, we're trying to finish up now,
I
gang.
understand you've continued, and I really appreciate Jamie Hines' comment, but I do, for the record, want to point out.
You want
that
to
it
come
is-
to the mic, Tom, so,
I appreciate Jamie's comment, I appreciate all the discussion, but I do want to point out for the record that federal tax law changed this last year, and the state of Vermont capped charitable giving, the credit. So the idea of a runway or, creating an ease into this for nonprofits, my point to Ann and others is nonprofits are a different category. Whether or not we comment on the value of them in society, it's recognized, this is law. So we have been constrained this year with how we raise money in this state. And if we are taking more money away at the local level, we are going to be in increasingly dire straits. So we have a little perfect storm. I understand it's Vermont and we're looking for revenue anywhere we can, and we have a state mandate, but I go back to my kind of folksy metaphor of my daughter's beanbag. We can't just keep squeezing it from one place to the other because it doesn't exist. So,
well,
thank you.
we would invite you, as well as Tom, we would invite you to submit something to Lee and to be considered, again, in advance of the next meeting. I think that'd be very helpful, not only what you have in mind, but what information and understandings you can bring to it from the experience of others. Josh?
Just one other thing. I think it would be valuable to, get any additional feedback on how to incorporate single-family residences into this program, and that both from a credit and an encouragement of their addressing residential stormwater issues.
Okay, next item is Charlie, who is here, who's going to give us the annual report and update from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission.
Are we here?
Yes, sir.
John Zacconi, your appointee to our board, is joining me. Thank you. Apologies for other towns that ran late.
We apologize to you. You've been very gracious, both of you.
No problem at all. I believe you got our annual report in your packet. Good, thank you. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. I know you're already running kind of behind schedule. But the first page gives you some background, context about the RPC and about what we are and our board and some funding. Your representatives on our board and our committee. Thank you, John. John also serves on our executive committee. And so now he's our treasurer. So
They keep giving me titles.
he's a very important man. On pages number 2 and then on top of page 3 are some Shelburne-specific activities, including things like giving Steve. Sorry, that was Lee, an extended leave, merged into one word. Sorry, Lee. Giving Lee some leave time to be here as interim town manager. And some other projects. I'm not going to review all these in detail, but if there's any questions or comments. And really this visit, I try to do this every fall, is really a customer service call. If there's things we can do better to provide better service to the town, or any comments you want to give us on our service to the town, this is why I'm here and happy to take it back. On the middle of the third page are some projects that you have in the Transportation Improvement Program. So transportation capital projects funded with state and federal transportation funds. And then the last couple pages are regional activities that we undertake county-wide, including, we updated our regional plan and transportation plan and economic development strategy, clean water issues that we've been supporting, building homes together, public health issues, dispatch, things I know have been here on, that one we've talked about before here. But if I can answer any questions on those, happy to do that, or any feedback you have for us as a member of the Regional Planning Commission. Or John, I don't think anything you want to add.
No, other than it's a well-run organization, I think I'm on my 7th, 8th year? I can't remember now. Like I said, they keep giving me new titles. And it's an enjoyable group. I appreciate the work that they do and the help. Shelburne's is quite sophisticated. Not every town is as sophisticated as us, and they lean on the Regional Planning Commission more so than we may. And I think it's great that we can all pull together as a community to facilitate that. So I serve proudly, and I enjoy my time with them.
Thank you. Well, there's no question that the commission is a very close partner. I want to repeat, as you already know, Charlie, and others have heard, that we are tremendously grateful for the generosity of the commission in making Lee available for the period of time that he has been to us. I think it's the best evidence of what you gain by cooperative and collaborative work, and in the public realm, and there aren't a lot of examples of it. So at the start, I wish you could possibly know how grateful we are and how appreciative we are. I had one quick question, and it was stimulated by some of the discussion in the later pages of your report, and that is to wonder whether the Transportation Demand Management Program has evaluable outcomes. What are the objectives when and where it's administered and initiated, and what have you learned from it? It seems to me intriguing.
Yeah, so we do have some data, particularly from the Way to Go program, because it's a specific, wow, I'm sorry, it's late. Apparently later than I'm used to speaking. But we do have some specific results that came out of that program that we can share with you. And really it's trying to encourage some changes in behavior. From a community-wide standpoint, I think we've been seeing some small shifts and increases in biking and walking. So I think there's some success to point to. It's always difficult to point to the causation. Was it us? Was it other things going on? Is it our population changing? But I think we're seeing some progress in that area.
It's kind of a special interest of ours. Remember, we had a long discussion with the Transit Authority about Vermont Teddy Bear and the frequency and duration of trips that they were scheduling. So we have some unique circumstances, and I think anybody who's been attempting the adventure of going to the village and back recently is aware of how concentrated the traffic is and how little it takes to create what seem to be insurmountable blockades. And this notion kind of stuck with me as something that maybe we could pursue in terms of our own particulars, our own village particulars. So.
I think there's some opportunities there. And the other thing I'll say about the traffic congestion piece is there is a lot of opportunity for working on the traffic signals. Shelburne Road, I think, has either the oldest or second oldest series of traffic controls. I don't know if it's in the state or in Chittenden County, but it's in great need of upgrading those signals. I mean, there's no shock to anybody that travels that road. So anyway, I think between those two things, I think there's more opportunity for sure.
Thank you, Charlie. Josh, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, given its potential impact on Shelburne, I'd really like to get an update on the regional dispatch process.
So the board for if you remember, there was a question about putting in front of the voters for town meeting day 5-6 months ago, the question of joining Chittenden County Public Safety Authority. 6 towns did vote to join that, created that entity. So that board started meeting, probably April, May, so they've met a few times. And I would say it's kind of in just very startup mode. I think right now they're working on bringing in a consulting, maybe executive director for a transition period to get it started. And so I think, stay tuned, I'll say. I think and I said this, I think the last time I was here about that topic, I'd still encourage Shelburne to, at a minimum, monitor what's happening because of the potential for impacts on you. And, maybe even to take the step to actually join the authority, which does not commit you to providing services through that authority. You may or may not recall, but there was a very clear intention with the authority to have a two-stage process. The first was be at that table and participate in decisions about how it might get created. The second thing, though, was to actually have a decision point for the select board about whether to actually contribute dollars and human resources to that organization. And so, I think that there's still certainly opportunity if you did want to join and therefore be able to better influence what happens there and how it might impact the town, or at least attend, and certainly there are public meetings, so you can certainly, voice positions that way also. But it's still very early. It's hard to tell what implications, and I know you had some conversations about that a few months ago with the 911 board in particular, so.
Okay, is there a mailing list that are?
Yeah, there's
put out?
at least an email list, and I believe, Lee, you're probably on that, or I shouldn't assume. You're not getting. That we could certainly do.
That would be really helpful to have.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Nothing, Jamie?
No, a big thank you. I'm impressed by the list. I feel like I'm pretty plugged in on some of this stuff, but there are so many new programs here and just a lot happening. So great partnership. Staff is very involved, obviously, and it's working very well, in my opinion.
Mary?
Yes, I do have a question. With respect to the tip,
Yeah.
you talk about one that's on the Route 7 Harbor Road, Falls Road, the 1.54 million for intersection upgrades. I see that it's part of the FY 2018 Vermont Agency of Transportation Capital Program, I think. But there's no timing associated with your note on that, so I'd like some elaboration.
Yeah, it's even worse than that. In that, when you see the phrase, it's an illustrative project, that means it might really get into the program, and it's on kind of a list that might move up at some point. So there really is no funding identified for it, as opposed to being in a more, if you think about a capital program, there's funding identified for that, even if it's in the out years. It's, so, sorry, just to be blunt, but.
Not likely soon. Is
What's that?
Not likely soon?
Yeah, right. I couldn't even hazard a guess as to when that might move. I don't know, John, if you know anything more particular.
Just to go over a little bit of the history of this, as the tip really does come down from V-Trans with input from the Regional Planning Commission. And V-Trans did not have this on their list. In my conversations with Joe before he moved on, he expressed to me the interest in this project here, and that we do, through the Regional Planning Commission, have the illustrative mechanism to at least put it on their radar. So Joe encouraged me to come to the board, and I had to go to the entire commission and ask for this, because it's the only, if I remember right, Charlie, the only illustrative project we have in our.
I can't
So, knowing that there's no commitment to it, the rest of the commission was agreed. I mean, we got into this whole discussion about now are other towns going to come out and want this, and is it going to cause a big problem? But it never did. But this is only there because you all from Joe, asked me if we could get it on there to keep it on V-Trans radar so that they know we're interested in it. So at least every now and again, you know, the bureaucrats in Montpelier, of which I speak fondly because I happen to be one, when they look over the list, you actually see it, which makes it, reminds you of it, and it puts it in your mind, and maybe that would have some help to us someday in moving it along. So that's kind of the history of why that's there and the way it is.
We have to have something when the Bay Road Bridge is done.
Yeah, so yeah, V-Trans is aware that we're interested in this, and, you know, it's there to keep them at least aware of it. So that's kind of the short version of how that got to be where it is.
Thanks.
Thank you, John. Any questions? The public, any discussion? Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir,
Thank you, John.
for being so patient. Thank you, John. Jim, your turn is almost coming, but you will already, your ears will already be burning if, but after my faux pas. But one of the projects noted in this report was the Eagle Scout project for the flashing beacon on US 7.
Fantastic. When is that?
It says construction to take place in 2018.
We are waiting on a state review. The documents that were needed, as far as I know, have all been filed, and we wait to hear back from the state. I've been told not to order any pieces or parts till they say go.
Okay, the next.
Been a great help on that project.
Thank you, and thank you, Lee. The next item is request for waivers of penalties for late filed homestead declaration forms. There are 3. Do you want to take the lead here?
Sure. Just very briefly, originally we thought there were actually 3 requests for these particular waivers. It turns out there are 2 separate requests for homestead waivers and 1 request for a roughly $20 late fee on a sewer bill. And I think we've got at least 2 of those persons here to speak to those requests.
You want to introduce them in some order? You want to?
Ken, you've been here for the long haul.
Good evening. My name's Ken Scott. I'm O'Brien Drive. Hoping to get your help with my issue with the Homestead Declaration. Our family moved here in December from California. I didn't learn about a Homestead Declaration until July, so a couple months ago when we received our property tax bill. And I noticed I was listed as a non-resident, which surprised me. And I've been learning lots of things about the ins and outs of forms and processes in the state. And investigated it, found out I was supposed to have filled it out in April, and realized that it was part of generally filing taxes, I guess, is the normal process. I guess due to some confluence of events, because we moved here in December, my wife is the one who's working, and she is a remote worker at this point. So she didn't officially come to the state of Vermont till January 1st. So we didn't have to file taxes, which is, I guess, would have taken care of this issue in April when we did that. Coming from the state of California, I've never heard of a homestead declaration. It's not something we did in that state. We do lots of different stuff, but we don't do that particular thing. And as soon as I found out about this, I immediately filed it and found out that there was a penalty. And in the process of interviewing a gentleman to do my taxes for the next year, he mentioned that it might be worth the while to ask for a waiver. He said couldn't hurt to ask, and so I'm coming in that way of just thought I would ask due to our circumstances, due to the, I think, strange setup of events that made it that I never had any sort of information about the Homestead Declaration. I did have some thought about that we had a real estate agent from here and we had an attorney help us with their transaction, but once I investigated that, I realized that this is a more or less a tax matter, and even though they are experts in their fields, that's not really something that they would advise us on. So I, even in my frustration, kind of let it go, that's not something that they should have done. I would have loved for them to have done that, but they didn't. And I understand at this point why they probably didn't. So I just come to you tonight, hoping to get the fee waived based on our circumstances. And again, I don't think it's anybody's fault. I don't think it's just a weird set of events. Is from my thorough review of this, of what I could have done differently, or maybe where it could have come up. So I just come in the spirit of hoping for some goodwill.
Thank you, Ken.
Sure.
Yeah, welcome to Vermont.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful here. It's amazing.
And most things you could probably leave in California, so.
Yes.
We're glad you didn't bring them with you.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
And I did.
Welcome to Shelburne.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Do we have an amount?
It's 293 and some change.
And did you identify a category of, policy category?
I think it's
I
up
was
to
going
the,
to look at that, and I forgot completely that.
I have the
Oh,
policy.
good, thank you.
Yeah.
So we are constrained, as you may or may not be aware, as far as just statutory authority to do this and by the
yeah.
charter. So typically, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the burden would be on the applicant, the requestor, to sort of identify a potential category
Oh, okay.
for consideration here. I'm happy to share it with you. I can talk through it. They're limited, and typically it's a hardship, right?
Okay.
So I don't know if that had been explained or if he's seen these, but
We had talked in some depth, but not in
Okay.
great detail.
Yes.
Why don't you review that for us?
sure. I can read them to you. You can take a
So-
look at this for
No,
a few
I think
minutes, and
it was- I
then
think it
my
was
preference would
discussed-
be for you to tell us which category do you think you fall into,
Okay.
and then we can evaluate it,
Certainly.
if that's fair.
Sure.
As I said, they're pretty limited.
Okay. Okay, so does this, I'm sorry. Just noticing straight off that it's a penalty for late property taxes, which this is not a late property tax? So does
Right.
it still apply?
Should.
Right. This is just, this
That,
is.
that seems to be the
Right.
confusion, that this is a
Any
fairly
penalty.
unique
Yeah, it's
event.
a most unusual circumstance. It's
not.
it's related to property tax, but it is
Yeah,
not
this isn't the
technically
same
a
thing.
property tax.
This
But
is
it's
just
my
a
under-
treat your
Payment.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is,
Are you a resident or a non-resident?
yeah, this is Homestead Declaration,
Which
so
then-
I don't think
So-
that applies.
Do we have authority to do this, I guess, is the question.
Non-homestead thing,
It's-
rather than the filing fee? Because I thought the filing fee was, if you didn't file it on time, was like $15. Something.
My understanding is there's this penalty fee. It's 3% of the school portion of a property tax bill. So it's interrelated with property tax. It's not directly a property
Is it
tax.
a penalty, or is
Yeah, it's a
it?
penalty.
It's a penalty
It's-
fee. And I've been led to understand that similar requests have been brought to this board in the
Okay.
past. So it's not the first
I don't
time,
think
but
this
how
one
they've been
applies.
dealt with, I don't
That's
have
just
that
for
history.
late taxes.
But I thought we embraced penalty fees when we did the policy work. Did we not do a second policy after the, spending quite a bit of time on the first, you'll recall, that covered fees?
Unfortunately, I don't have the
No,
longevity of
and
the
we don't know the
history.
I don't
precedents.
remember that.
And we don't know the precedents.
Peter may be helpful in that regard.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Peter, for being here.
I'm not sure that we had a policy on the late filing of the Homestead Declaration with the state. It was more of a penalty for not paying on time.
Correct.
So
Okay.
I think
Right.
we're trying to see if that would fit the
Yeah,
policy we
Okay.
adopted. It's a penalty,
it's a
but
penalty.
not the same thing that the policy was contemplated, I think, to address with the criteria that was developed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Do you have a
an-
recommendation?
Do we
or you?
have-
So,
Well,
I think it's an interesting circumstance and probably a one-off, and
my sense, without trying to go outside the boundaries of previously established policy, would be we have several folks, we've made these requests for right or wrong, we've encouraged them to make the request of the board. Seems like we owe them some kind of answer as best we can under the guidelines we've given ourselves.
I don't know what that answer was either, but.
All right. So,
I certainly feel that. I mean, everybody that I've addressed this with, it seems to be a unique situation, and it's a situation that I would love to have avoided. I'd love to be able to present my evidence of how good I am at paying things and
Yeah,
how
I
on
don't
time
know.
I am with stuff, and how this really, it irked me when I found out that there was something I didn't know. You know, it was an unknown. Yeah, I didn't
it
realize
should
it
be
was.
like a welcome kit.
There should be.
Yeah.
There should be. And I will say that our real estate agent and the attorney did a great job
I don't know the number.
sharing quite a bit of things with me, so.
So my feeling is like the whole point of being able to come to the select board is for us to be able to hear and make a decision humanely. The purpose of having the policy regarding late payments of taxes is because it happens fairly frequently, and it seemed as if there should be a process in place so that they didn't always have to come before the select board, because there were certain things that I think most people were like, okay, if you had somebody die and you're taking over an estate, most of us agreed that regardless of who's sitting up here, we would waive that. But there's still going to be things that we don't have policies for, and this is one of them. And this is the option for a citizen to be able to come and for us to decide, is it a good enough reason or not?
So I take back what I said about the policy.
Okay.
And we're back to,
Do you have an amount?
The amount is $293.78.
$293.78.
Okay, so I move to waive the late Homestead Declaration penalty of $293.78 for, I don't have a property here, for the property of Ken Scott and family.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hanging in. You've been here the whole night. Appreciate that.
thank you.
So we hope you'll join the Shelburne community, get involved. We'd appreciate your help.
I already have a daughter at the school, so.
Great. Doctor, you're next.
Oh, I'm gonna recuse myself.
Thanks, great.
I believe you all may already have some documentation. This just,
Yes.
completes the documentation. So
Is this the what we have?
there may be something in addition there. So, just to go through the entire story is, we are listed as not having filed our homestead declaration according to the state, or we were at one point after the April 17th tax deadline. But if we were to go back and quickly review the story, is early in April, I contacted our accountant to go over our taxes to make sure they'd be filed on April 17th. I have further documentation in emails or text messages. I didn't provide those because that's, I think, a waste, but I could provide those if necessary. But I actually contacted him on April 17th to say, have you filed the taxes and have you filed the homestead declaration? The answer was yes. I even double-checked with him on April 19th to say, was everything filed on time? And he said yes. Then, when we got our taxes on approximately July 28th, I was going through the taxes and I realized that we were listed as non-residential, and considering we only have one home, that didn't seem right. I contacted the accountant and also sent an email to Mr. Frankenberg, and I said, what's going on? And according to the accountant, the taxes have been filed, and he said there have been, as well as the homestead declaration, and I was told at that time that there were some issues with the state having people listed as having properly filed their homestead declaration. I got on the state website, and it did say we had not filed our homestead declaration, but it also said that there have been numerous issues in the state where they had people incorrectly listed as not having filed their homestead declaration. In an effort to be thorough, it gave me the option to file it, and I said, well, I'm going to file it because I don't want to be now penalized for the property taxes component. And it did say wait, and eventually we'll clear it up. And that never
came to pass, we were still listed as being late, and I'm not sure if that's because I then basically refiled our homestead declaration on July 28th, and so whoever was at the state didn't figure it was worth documenting that it had been filed on April 17th. The documentation you have is from our accountant, which shows that he filed the taxes on April 17th appropriately. He's got a copy of both the state notice that he had filed them on time on April 17th, and he's got a copy of the form showing that the homestead declaration was a form that he'd signed, and he felt that that was appropriate documentation to show that he'd filed everything on April 17th.
Peter, do you have anything that you can offer? Because I know I was in the same situation and was essentially told the same thing, but I haven't actually even checked. But I was just wondering, because I heard the same, because that there was a difficulty in the state addressing this issue, and I didn't know if you knew anything more about it.
We have heard from a number of people that depending upon the tax software package that was used to file with the state, the income tax went through okay, the income tax filing, but the homestead declaration, which is a little bit of a twist, didn't necessarily go through. And we know several people who have said they thought they had filed through their tax software program and got the notice, as Dr. Bartlett did, that they were non-residential and had to go through and change that. I talked to the state about it to see if they had any particular software package they were aware of. The staff person I talked to said, well, the person just didn't file it correctly. That was the only comment that I got from the state about these. But we have definitely heard of more than Dr. Bartlett's case where people thought they filed it as part of their software package, but it didn't get through for whatever reason.
Any other discussion?
I mean, other than my observation is this case is more compelling than the previous one because he actually filed.
Yeah.
As he
And
is
has
required to
documentation,
do
right?
and has documentation.
Yeah.
And this instance has come up, I think, even since I've
Yeah.
been on the board. Someone
Yeah.
had the same issue with just
And we
no
had this
acknowledgement.
last summer, didn't we? And-
Right.
And it turns out there's minimum or no follow-up correspondence from the state to you. So you're, at some point,
You
you're
don't
ignorant.
know. Right.
Remember?
Every property at the beginning of the tax year is classified as non-residential until
You
the
file the
homeowner files the
declaration.
homestead declaration.
Oh.
And that's what changes them into that
Yeah.
classification. So it's reset every year, and the homeowner has to file to
Yeah.
make it to the homestead declaration.
Well, entertain a motion to
What's the amount?
$547.
$547.39.
$547.39.
Move to waive the penalty in the amount of $547.39 for a late homestead declaration filing for Dr. Craig Bartlett and Dr. Colleen Parker, 4047 Spear Street, Shelburne, Vermont.
There a second?
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you for being patient, for hanging around. Would you, on your way, ask Colleen to return? Sarah? Oh.
I'm just pulling my out.
Ah.
I finished one hat, I had to start another one.
Uh-oh.
One more.
There is one.
Yes, we have one more.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just waiting for Colleen to return.
Sure.
So. Now I remember, we had the same, there's an information gap in this system where the taxpayer is more knowledgeable than Peter at some point. I remember now. We had the same situation with one or two last summer.
Yeah, it's an unusual structure the state has
Yeah,
created, having this additional filing piece that
yeah.
needs to happen. I know I used to do it, I just go to the state's website and file it directly there, rather than depending on it with my taxes.
Yeah.
that the real estate agent and the lawyer didn't say anything about the homestead tax to the new buyer. I found that incredibly surprising, just saying.
Yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah, I think they were negligent in their duties there.
I agree.
I can tell you while we have a few minutes, would you like to hear an anecdote from, no.
Saved by the
You
bell.
hooked me in and
But I have a few from Maine Public Service about real estate agents and collecting back taxes and a number of other things. And one would be surprised, yeah. Okay, Colleen, we're now on the third matter of Casarico.
Yes, I don't believe that she will be here. This is a request for a waiver of $20.51 late fee regarding sewer charges. And having reviewed the information, some of which is better private than public, I believe it clearly meets the severe health criterion for a waiver.
There a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Josh moves, Mary seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye, and those opposed, nay. Thank you. The next item is the memorandum of understanding between the town and the Boy Scouts regarding the Scout Barn. And would you want to give kind of an overview? We have the draft memorandum of understanding. Oh, I'm sorry, and
Excellent.
this is your product.
I'm just Summit Circle, and I am the leader of Shelburne, I'm the head of Shelburne Leaders. All because he said I should do it, just so you know.
Okay.
Why not? Yeah, so thank you for hearing us tonight. When I became Scoutmaster in 2012, the charter organization of Troop 602 is the Shelburne Charlotte Lions Club. The way the Boy Scouts work is that each scout troop has got a charter organization. Sometimes these are churches, sometimes these are community organizations that work through philanthropic efforts to make the community better. Sometimes they're fire departments. We were with the Lions Club, and basically they're the ones that hold our charter. They basically are this intermediary between the troop and the town and other types of organizations. So we have this charter organization, the Lions Club, which folded in 2014. We have this agreement between the town of Shelburne and the Lions Club that would allow the Boy Scouts to use the Scout Barn that was built with funds from Dunbar Bostwick, who, if you know anything about Dunbar Bostwick, he was the ultimate Boy Scout, just a fantastic human being. And the boys have been using it since the mid-'80s. And this agreement is basically a carbon copy of the agreement that was in place with the Shelburne Lions Club and the town of Shelburne. It's transferred over to Shelburne Leaders, which Ginger Williamson is the chair of, who is our new charter organization, and it's just an opportunity for us to close one more loop of our organization to make sure that we're all squared away. I'll be stepping down as Scoutmaster on October 15th. Dr. Brian Irwin is taking over in my place, so I'm really looking forward to seeing Brian do some great work with the troop. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or Ginger may be able to answer them.
Thank you, Jim.
So your organization now holds the Boy Charter.
For the Boy Scout troop. And in all honesty, for a while, I didn't really get, like, what's the big deal about an MOU with the Scout Barn and the town? But it's really so that the town can never say, oh, by the way, you don't get to use it anymore. It's a huge part of the Boy Scout piece. We actually make it available to like the SCSPTO for their fall fundraiser pickup and things like that. And it's where we store things and all of that. The language hasn't changed. All that's changed is that it's Shelburne Leaders instead of the now defunct Lions Club and all of that. So it just provides both parties protection.
Now, Lee, you submitted this to the town attorney, do you?
Brian to take a look at it. Hadn't heard back from him, but he didn't express any reservations about it.
I've got one picky comment on the second page. Select board is one word. And we guard our brand. But I'd give that up for having,
I just have a question on page 1 under 3. It says the Boy Scouts shall be responsible for all utilities. How has that worked in the past?
We pay for the propane heat. We had we used to pay for the oil heat before we transferred over to propane. We pay the electric bill for it. The town never sees those bills.
Okay, I was just wondering how that happened.
just one other comment, which the phrase in the, when it discusses, should the town demolish, and the phrase is, in the reasonable opinion of the Boy Scouts. I thought that was pretty,
It's not our language.
That goes back to the 1993 agreement.
I thought that was pretty strong, but so is the strength of the Boy Scouts in town. So it more than is a measure to me. So, is there any further discussion? None? Is there a motion to the effect of approving the memorandum of agreement with that one brief edit?
So moved.
Moved by Colleen,
Second.
seconded by Jamie. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you. It was good to
Thank
meet
you.
you.
No, thanks.
And if you,
I'm around, I usually don't look so nice when I'm on the parade selling trees, so.
well, if you want to come some night and talk to us about what you do and how we can help and work together, please feel invited.
We appreciate that you help our boys make Eagle Scouts, so that's the
Thanks, Jim.
possibility.
Thank
Are
you.
we going to see you again before you retire, we hope?
We may have an open house at the Scout Barn, and the select board will be invited to attend.
Okay.
Either before or after the turnover. I'm not going anywhere. I'm gonna stay on as the assistant scoutmaster. I'm just not gonna drive the bus. I'm gonna sit in the
There you go.
back
Have more
seat.
fun.
That's right. Thank you.
Well, you
you.
deserve it. Thanks, Jim. Next item on the agenda is to request approval, is to consider authorization to sign the project commitment form for the Irish Hill Bike Ped Grant. And Wendy and Kevin may be here for that, are you?
Yes.
And
Dave's
Lee, do you
here.
want to?
Sure, so this is a fundamental first step. As you know, the state of Vermont awarded the town nearly $600,000 for that project. That application had come before you previously. Dean and others had worked on that. The third time was indeed the charm for this project. So approving this form is now the official first step that will allow other aspects of the administrative agreement to move forward. And then from there, the town and the state can work together on the project. So the town had already essentially committed to doing this when it filed the application. This is sort of a re-approval of that commitment and launching of the administrative process. And this would designate, as I understand it, both Dean Pierce and Ann Janda to serve as the employees in responsible charge of the project. It needs somebody to be overseeing this. Is that correct? My understanding from you and Ann?
I knew, and I thought Ann was maybe going to stay here, and there had been some discussion, would it be Dean, would it be Ann? And then Ann, and I said, Ann, I'm happy to step aside, and she said, well, what about both of us? Because there are certain aspects of the project that I think she feels comfortable dealing with, and I think other aspects she does not. So I said I would be happy to do it collaboratively or jointly.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Then we can simply make the adjustment to plural employees.
Yes. And if you're okay with this, then I would sign off on this, fill in the names, and get it back to the
Sure.
state.
Kevin or Wendy, you want to have a comment at all?
At this point in the evening, with you guys 3.5 hours in, unless there's any dissenting opinion, absolutely not. There's nothing I can add to the conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Move to authorize the town manager to sign the project commitment form for the Irish Hill Bike Ped grant as stated.
And a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay? The ayes have it. Thank you.
A little late eye.
Step by step.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is a request for a letter of support for a grant application by the Historical Society, and I think Dorothy is here. Welcome.
It's really self-explanatory. The sheet that you have.
Dorothy, I hate to interrupt, and
Sorry.
it should be self-explanatory, but you need to let the viewing audience know who you are.
All right. Dorothea Pinar. I'm currently the president of the Historical Society. So we are applying for a grant from the Lake Champlain Basin Program. Dean is always good about sending out information about grant possibilities, and since I'm on the Design Review Commission, I get that, and I said, wow, Historical Society might be able to get jump start on our project over at the town hall with this grant. So spoke with Jim Brangan about that. He's the person who manages the program. And so we would like to get a letter of support. There's no financial ask here. It's simply a letter of support for setting up a scanning and digitizing program for the Historical Society, and to also have some display boards. The digitizing would be also a remote, would have a setup at the town hall when we move in, and a remote scanning setup so we could use scan things that are in the town vault. And it's really just to inventory properly our collection, and to also increase the accessibility of historic documents to the general public through our website. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
You know, Lee and I are both involved in the project so-called steering committee.
Right.
And I would think that this would be an initiative that committee would be happy to support. I know Ruth's not here, but as additional.
Kevin actually wrote us a letter of support also, and Colleen Haig, who was our 250th chairman, committee chair, and knows a lot about the importance of preserving our documents.
Oh,
So the real goal, like I said, is so that people won't actually have to touch the real things. So it will be more accessible, plus we're preserving documents so that people don't have to actually handle them.
Super.
Is it a motion to instruct staff to draft a letter of support?
If you were in favor of it, then I would certainly write the letter on your
Okay.
behalf.
Sure.
Just get it done. I know time is of the essence here.
Yeah, I think the motion is an
we
instruction
need-
to support, I mean, to the town manager, Lee, and to put something together, then either he or I can sign it.
We hope to send in everything Friday, which is a little ahead, if that's
Everything wants
possible.
to happen by Friday.
We'll be good
get
for
it. We'll get it done.
We'll be good for it, it's only Tuesday night. but- Is there a motion to that effect? Josh moves.
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. Dorothea, thank you very much. Best of luck with it. It's a really good idea and a wonderful purpose.
Thank you.
From, the next item is to renew coverage by casualty property insurance coverage by the current provider, which is the Vermont League of Cities of Town Property and Casualty Intermunicipal Fund for the following policy year. I've struggled with this for a period of time. Some of you know I'm on the PACIF board. There are 18 different ways I finally decided of looking at this, 17 of which may be innocent, but the last may not be, and because there's even that sliver of possibility that I have a conflict, I'm going to recuse myself. And ask Jamie to take over.
Happy to do that. Okay. So I think the goal of the agenda item was to pick up the discussion where we left off on, I think specifically the PACIF. I don't know if the intention was to make this a broader discussion about contract services, but the agenda item seems to reflect PACIF, so I
Right,
think
and-
we should focus on that.
This was born out of the conversation about contract services. There was a prior motion to look at legal services, and then I somewhat prematurely tossed that ball in the air about insurance services because we were looking at those biggest ticket items in the budget. That really wasn't the best move on my part. It was premature to suggest that, although there was a motion to look into insurance services. My suggestion is that given timing, circumstance, the interim management issues, it would make more sense for us to reconsider that prior action and renew services, and then take a fresh look at contract services in 2019 when management has been resolved and settled, and we've got too much on our plate to think we can launch into a full-blown review of insurance coverage at this time of the year, and given everything else we've got going on.
Yeah, I mean, my sense was we may have gotten caught up in the moment on this, and a date was thrown out, and I think we wanted, out of an abundance of caution, just try to look at whatever that provision was in the contract, and with a little bit of reflection, I think it's probably not as time-sensitive as some other items, so I would agree that it probably makes sense to
I
defer
apologize for-
on this for a little while, but interested
No,
in
I
other
mean-
perspectives here. I don't, yeah.
Yeah, and all of these things, I think, since this is an annual thing, correct?
Yes, it is.
I mean, it seems, given that discussion, it doesn't seem unreasonable to move ahead in that regard.
Okay. You good with that?
Yep. Move to renew
You're okay waiting? Okay.
CP coverage by the current provider, VLCT PACIF for the following policy year.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion passes. We will move on to the
Thank you.
next agenda item and grab the chair. Did someone grab
Yeah.
him?
I
Okay,
think that was, hopefully Peter was getting him.
all right.
We caught back up with ourselves. We can still
We might be
get
able
out
to finish on
as per
time.
the agenda prediction.
Doubtful.
Perhaps Peter probably can help you with that.
Thank you, Jamie.
If I
Cool.
may offer Peter.
I have 4 copies, 4 extra copies of things.
Yeah, we have copies.
Is
Is
it,
that
I
Is
wouldn't
that yet a
mind having
separate
one.
new document, Lee?
Yeah,
I mean, they've been given copies of.
is it a
This
new?
one.
yeah, it's new.
Okay, it's new.
This is different.
Newer than our packet?
This
Yes,
is,
apparently.
Oh,
It's new.
Did you email it to us
And I'll
also?
explain why.
Okay.
okay.
But, uh, well, I could explain why, and then you can decide whether you want any extra copies.
Let's do that.
Okay.
that's a new
Yield the
approach.
floor to you. We're
So, am I on the agenda now?
Yes, the next item is proposed conflict of interest ordinance as vetted by Town Council and with an objective to warn a public hearing for October 23, 2018.
Good evening. Lee Suskin, Chair of the Ethics Committee. So what the confusion is, as you recall at the last meeting, we had a document that you wanted vetted by the town attorney. Is he here tonight?
no.
Okay. So he met, I guess, with Jamie by phone, I think.
Yes.
And Tom
And Tom.
Little to discuss it a bit, and came back with a version. And Tom, I wasn't involved with that, but Tom sent it to me. And Tom and I discussed it, and after a while, Tom and I saw where we agreed with him. He had some good ideas. Where we disagreed with him, and came up with a version that Tom and I agreed to recommend back to him. For various reasons, he went along with some of those things, changed some of those things, and sent a document to you that neither Tom or I have signed off on.
Wait. You're saying Brian?
Brian.
The version Brian sent us?
The version you have in front of you has not been signed off by Tom and me. So I have 4 areas that I'm in disagreement on. My committee has not had a chance to meet in all this, so the committee has not had a chance to take a position on it. And I know that the hope is this would be simple, it would be short, and you can just vote it for a public hearing, and maybe you'll do that. But you can decide how short it's going to be, but I would like a little time to explain where I disagree.
Wendy, I guess I'm a little confused, Lee, because this says L. Suskin and T. Little suggestions, 9, 10, 18,
Yeah,
brackets 2, as vetted by Town Council. But you're saying this is only went as far as the Town Council and not back to you?
the version, I had a version, it says on the bottom 9, 10, 18. Actually, it's a version 9, 20, 18 at 5:30 PM. And it's the version that Lee saw. There was an error in it that he sent to you because it had the definition of probable cause, which you had to delete. So I don't know if this version that you have has probable cause deleted from it.
It does have probable cause deleted.
Do you mean the
Okay.
So-
definition, or do you mean?
The definition and the whole concept.
Because council had recommended not using that as a criterion for judgment and instead substituting something different. So here we are in this procedural conundrum of, and I say this with no judgment attached, but you had a version the committee was satisfied with. It was your call to send it to council for
Correct.
review. Did so, made adjustments. As you've seen, there are still 2 or 3 matters to resolve before warning it for hearing. Now the concern I think we're hearing is does this need to go back to the committee and continue to go back and forth,
So
or
we have
where
an
do we go with
incomplete
it?
process.
Well, I don't know if it's incomplete. I
Well,
think Lee believes it is
I have
incomplete.
a version here
We
that at
did what
least
you
I
asked
can
to do.
sign off on. My committee can't because they haven't been able to meet, but that I feel okay about. You warning for a public hearing, but maybe you don't want it. And, but I could, if I go through, there are 4 areas that we can.
It's a bit unorthodox, no? To have you just submit unilaterally.
I would feel
comments.
fine putting it
I
off.
think the sense of this is, when does your committee next meet, Lee?
The committee doesn't have regular meetings anymore, but I can call a special meeting at any time.
Would there be a meeting that could be called between now and October 9th, so we can come back to this October 9th?
Yes.
My sense is we come back to this October 9th. This seems totally incomplete at this point.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
Colleen, do you want to?
We don't have the most recent draft.
Well, now I don't know what to,
Well, we do. We have a markup from Brian that incorporates his edits,
Right.
and Lee had some additional changes that
Right.
he's got a separate version.
There was one
Right?
I saw, and I apologize, and I think this is the function that we get so much email traffic, and then you can forget. There was one I saw that, if I could,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
that I thought that the town attorney wanted all complaints to be public, and I don't see that in this one. And therefore, that's, so if it's in, if it's in the one we had in our packets, if somebody could point it out, because I didn't see it.
Hang on,
But I was
let's check.
certain that I saw it
I never saw that.
I
online.
never saw that.
I think this is, I mean, I'm really surprised
just
that.
get my
I'm sorry,
answer.
I thought you.
Thank you.
Thought, yeah.
So
I
is-
never saw that.
I thought
Okay.
you gave the answer.
All
I'm
right,
sorry. That's
thank
all.
you. So,
But
I must
I
have-
agree with the
and-
comments that,
I think I was next in line.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, and also Jerry, like we had talked, when we talked earlier this morning, and I thought that this one part about conflict of interest, that the attorney had recommended taking that out because it wasn't based in law, but that one's still in here. So there's definitely a few things in here. The page 2, it's under 4, and it's a conflict of interest does not
Not
exist.
exist solely because,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, well,
And
we
he's
obviously.
recommended just deleting that.
I don't know about that, so I can't even talk that over with my committee. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, so the sentence,
Does not exist.
It's on page
Yep.
2 under cardinal number 4, but 2 paragraphs down, a conflict of interest does not exist solely because 2 public officials are members of the same town board, commission, or
To
committee.
my knowledge, he's okay with that.
Well, it's not marked up on our draft, so
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
So my,
But it was recommended, I think, that he was going to remove that completely because it wasn't based in any law.
I'm sorry. Is,
Oh, no, go ahead.
okay, thanks. I mean, with all of these things going back and forth and about, nobody seems to have a final version. I think it's really premature for us to even get into a discussion. It's almost like a he said. So I agree with the idea that if we could put this off, have the Ethics Committee look at it and present us with the draft that they're comfortable with, that they want us to, with any commentary about differences of opinion between what the town attorney suggests and what the Ethics Committee, then we can move forward on this. But I think any other discussion at this point
The
really
other
doesn't get us
option-
anywhere.
The other option, which is how I thought we were moving forward, was we were instructing the town attorney, I was delegated, to work with Brian and Tom to review the document. He provided input, which we've received. We have a markup. Tom also received it. I thought it was our opportunity now to react to those changes with any input from the committee that you may have.
right, so that's where I'm wondering procedurally, and I thought this was the final markup version. We had a few minor issues to
Because it's
resolve,
not,
so
it's
where do
not
we
very,
go?
it's not an efficient process to have a town attorney review and spend money on
Right.
a document and then have it go back to
Right.
the committee.
Because
Well-
then it's going to have to go
Right.
to
Let
town
me,
council
Exactly,
again.
we haven't,
Where do we
If
go
I-
with that?
I think it would be helpful to take 15 minutes, not to sign off on anything, but to me to just go over these 4 areas, for you to provide your read so that when I go to the Ethics Committee, we know where you're coming from as we decide whether to make our recommendation for you for October 9th. If we could take 15 minutes to do that, that might be helpful.
One question, Jim. So do you know what the background for the town attorney's concerns
yes.
about?
So I
Okay.
received narrative
Okay.
comments, which Tom also received and shared with you. I don't know who else he sent this to.
Right.
And then I incorporated those into this.
Because that's what I'm referring to when I'm sorry, with Colleen. This is where, somewhere along the line, I've had some other different information here. Because I understood the question, for instance, on page, at the bottom of page 3, Article 8 was no longer to be determined. It was decided that that there could not be, a member could not be forced. So I'm totally confused
Well, why don't
at
I
this
do
point.
this?
Yeah.
Why don't I share Brian's input with everybody?
Yeah,
So
there
you
you
can
go.
all see it.
Yeah.
Let Lee take 15 minutes and share his
Please, go through
3
your
or 4
4.
points and get a gauge from
You
us on.
received, Tom and I commented on, that you received and you received, commented on Brian's comments. So if you're going to share Brian's comments, I would appreciate if you would also share
Yes.
the comments that Tom and I used to reply.
Okay.
Okay.
I will confirm with you that
Okay.
I'm sending the right version, though, because I
Okay.
think Tom had marked something up, and then Lee was
Right.
layering in input
Right.
from the town
And
attorney.
a lot of this happened without my knowledge, so that, I don't know how that happened. In any case, I'll try to make this short and sweet. There are four, and then maybe there are 5 or 6, there are another 2. So my understanding is, Dr. Parker's understanding is that either the select board or the town manager or someone has said that we delete the language, a conflict of interest does not exist solely because 2 public officials are member of the same town board, commission, or committee. My understanding is you discussed it last time, and you did not ask the ethics committee to remove that. But if I'm wrong on that, I'll let the ethics committee know.
We discussed it. We had a conversation with town council. Tom was on the phone.
Yeah,
And yes, we being me and Tom Little.
okay.
And we had a discussion about whether that was necessary or not.
And what was the resolution, because it's still in his version?
I think we didn't necessarily come to resolution on every point. Brian raised it. Tom and I
Okay.
talked about it. I mean,
Okay.
there's some sense of it's a bit
Okay.
superfluous, right? I think you could sort of look at that and say, is it really necessary?
Well,
It's sort of implied.
when I discuss it with the committee, does the select board want us to remove that, or you're still
Why
open to
don't we go
that?
on the basis that we're proposing that it be removed? And just so we start the discussion, Josh, why don't we go on the basis that there's a recommendation mostly to the effect that it be removed, and we're going to follow that, and we'd like the committee response.
Okay.
Could you clarify exactly what
Sure.
is being removed?
Yep. So there's a sentence in when we define conflict of interest that says a conflict of interest does not exist solely because 2 public officials are members of the same town board, commission, or committee. And I think the thinking from, Lee, you can provide the committee's thought process here, but was that maybe there's some benefit to actually being explicit about that. And the counter argument would be that's sort of implied, right? We sort of know that there's no conflict of interest for the entire board just because,
So you're going
One-
with implied and Lee's going with exact language?
No, what I'm thinking is, if an individual has a conflict of interest, they ought to recuse. If they have a conflict of interest because they're so close to another member of their committee, they ought to recuse. But the sole fact that another member of the committee is involved does not mean you need to recuse. It ought to be on a case-by-case basis.
I,
But
Okay? All right, what's the next one?
Okay. The next one is authority to provide advisory opinions. The town, now this is
Where are
not,
you?
so that is
it's in your,
11B.
it's in your document at
11B.
the 11B. The town manager, the town attorney thinks it's a bad idea. He doesn't say it's a bad idea because it creates legal problems. He's a bad idea. It's like he's another member of the ethics committee who would vote against this. And I don't know if that's particularly, when you sent it to the town attorney, whether you want them to weigh in on policy issues. Now,
Well,
what
I
he,
wouldn't, I think you're mischaracterizing his input, but
okay.
I'll let you go ahead.
Well,
I
he
do have his
recommends
input.
that you take it out, but as far as I know, he's not citing a legal reason for taking it out.
He is, in fact,
oh.
he's, some of this I'm a little uncomfortable getting too into the detail, but he's saying there could be libel risks if you have one party that you're taking one side, right? And by the way, I'm still thinking about advisory opinions, and I think we had never got to a conclusion with that on the call. So what Brian is trying to raise
Okay.
is there
So
some risk with having an advisory opinion where you're taking input in and you're basing an opinion that's going to be public record on one person's account? That could be libelous, right? In some,
Well,
potentially.
the way it now reads, which is not the way it reads in your document, but the way it reads, the way Tom and I sent it back to him, is different. So let me just start with, remember the Ethics Committee researched this for 6 months or longer. And in doing our research, we took guidance from the University of Vermont Legislative Research Service.
Right, I recall that.
And they said ethics committees play a significant role in fostering public support for and trust in local and state governments. They serve primarily to educate public officials on how to prioritize public duties when faced with conflicts of interest. In order to best achieve these goals, ethics committees benefit from the ability to provide training and legal advice, in addition to enforcement powers. The role of an ethics committee most often plays is largely advisory and educational, although it may hold enforcement power. In terms of advisory role of an ethics committee, its power consists of offering formal and informal advice to elected and appointed officials. City Ethics, the national nonprofit that has been studying ethics issues for 10 years, says in its model code, Ethics Committee a code includes authority to provide advisory opinion. This is the Ethics Committee's most important responsibility. It is very important for local government officials and employees whenever they are uncertain as to whether they should proceed with a matter to immediately seek advice. This will prevent unethical conduct from occurring due to a lack of knowledge or understanding and will create a series of precedents to guide officials and employees in the future. What we want is to avoid complaints. We want public officials to do the right thing. We want the public to know when they could file a complaint or when they shouldn't file a complaint. And if we can give an advisory committee opinion and avoid that, okay. So the way it reads in the version that the town manager never told you about, because this was a later version that Tom and I sent to him, and I have it here.
You mean town attorney?
The town attorney, I'm sorry, town attorney, I'm sorry, I keep confusing the two. That the town attorney didn't respond to, because Tom and I sent him a version that an individual on the committee can give an advisory opinion on request to a public official or a member of the public. If the person then relies on that advisory opinion and acts, so be it. A person can still file a complaint because you don't want an individual binding the entire ethics committee. But if the ethics committee hears it and finds that, in fact, that advisory opinion was wrong and the person actually did violate the ordinance, then the ethics committee will take that consideration when issuing any sanction. So it would be a very minor sanction because he or she advised on the advisory opinion, and it keeps any individual from binding the committee, and I think creating any liability for the town. The town attorney never responded to that suggestion from Tom and I.
Well,
That came after you saw it.
we'll welcome that response.
I didn't see that exchange.
So
but-
all I need to know
We'll
is how.
welcome that response from you. Here's a quick take from me. I think you've doubled down on bases for complaints, because now you're going to have a complaint about whether something was consistent.
With what?
Well, it says, in a manner consistent with advisory opinion. So I think the hole's being dug deeper than maybe it needs to, but that's a personal opinion.
Okay, I think it'll lead to fewer complaints.
I have serious questions about a committee acting acting in this form versus a sponsor of education. I think this goes way beyond sponsoring education. But that's a personal view. The third one is,
I mean, I actually respectfully disagree. I tend to think there could be value in an advisory opinion. I think we need a little meat around the bone on this to address what you just talked about, and maybe a recusal. There are things in here that just, on its
Right.
face,
We didn't
I
make
think
this
there's
up.
value. And we didn't come to a decision on this, by the way. You know, Tom and I were listening and deliberated a bit about the pros and cons of some of this. So these are all live issues for the board to try to coalesce around.
I guess I thought, you know, I got to admit, I am totally confused about this whole process. I mean, it makes no sense to me. But I think this section, I mean, one, we already looked at this before and everybody was happy with it. So to now, I mean, yes, okay, the council has a different, you know, may have a different thing, but personally, if I may offer my personal non-legal,
sure, by all means.
I think this was one of the strongest parts improvement in the ethics ordinance to allow this, because I think this is what will help members of the public and staff or whoever is involved have someone to ask about this. And if the ethics committee or can solidify this, I think that's an important thing. But the version I have has it all scratched out, which I think would be a big mistake. So I don't know how. I mean, I'm hearing 4 different versions of something.
But we're giving input to Lee, who is going to return to his committee by the grace of whomever, that will meet on a special occasion before we meet on the 9th, so that there's a response from the entire committee to the town attorney vet and to several reactions he's had since.
Okay.
That's the best we can do under the circumstances, it seems.
I don't know. So I'd like to add something. The one part about this that I thought was more concerning was this, that one or more of the members. So a single member could advise a member of a public official or someone or a citizen about something within like the ethics ordinance. And so my concern is that you have one member that's acting on behalf of the entire committee. So you could have like a rogue committee member that could just be giving off advice.
Well, this is a public official who's trying to do the right thing. So, yeah, if the public official, remember, we're going to do a lot of education, and we're going to have members educate public officials and the public. It's going to be a big part of this, and you wanted this to be a big part of this. So we're going to have an individual member who's doing the training session for other public officials. And that's just like giving an advisory opinion. It's, here's what you think we ought to do. It's not the whole committee voting on what he or she is saying.
Consequence here. It says, there's a consequence here. A public official cannot later be found to have violated the ordinance.
No. That's
been struck?
That's the version that.
All right.
That's not the version that.
I think our problem here is that
the version that I'm talking about is it would not bind the rest of the ethics committee.
you had 4 items.
Yes.
I think the utility right now is to get the 4th
Good.
one, and then we have we should have a scene set for returning next meeting.
Okay. The other one, he objects to the authority of the ethics committee to determine what should go on the website. And I'm not sure what his reasoning is, other than why should our committee do it when no one else does it? Josh?
With your permission. This was discussed when, as part of the social media policy as to who was the authority over what goes on the website.
Oh, okay.
Okay, last year. Okay, that discussion never continued because the issue or one of the things that was brought up is that all of the CBCs report to the select board. And so having, the issue is the idea of having the town manager have complete authority over what information any CBC presents to the public seemed to be a conflict because the CBCs report to the select board, not to the town manager. That was never resolved. It was, was put off for a discussion in the social media policy. So we really can't discuss this part without that part. But I agree that it seems to me that if a committee wants to provide information to the public, they should have the availability of doing that.
Are there any other comments about the four?
About the website? Or?
No, well, about the
Can we
website?
just review the four? I have website.
First, do you want to
Sorry.
respond to the website?
Sorry, Jerry.
We've only covered two.
Yeah, no, I don't,
Right.
for all of this, I think we should all take a deep breath, try to assume positive intent on some of this as well, which is very hard. I appreciate that, but the website piece is just one example where, can you imagine the administrative mess
No.
that would entail
No.
with having every CBC decide to post their own materials
Yes,
to?
I don't think there's a problem at all. I don't think that would be difficult.
Okay. that's
Okay,
all.
that's fine. I just raise that as, that should be a consideration.
For 6 years, we've been posting our minutes and everything on the website. We just send it over to Betty Marche and she posts it. And it's no problem.
Right.
This is not an
That's-
It was only a
that's
problem when the
staff.
town manager objected,
Yeah.
No, I
prior
know,
town
that's why
manager
I'm saying
objected to
recent
one
history
thing.
aside, right? Like, let's try to,
Okay. So the third area
Oh, I
is,
thought we had four.
Yeah, and that's why I got confused. There's only two that I.
3B.
the third area is whether one could authorize a public official to recuse. It's in there, and it's in the town attorney version, and it's in the ethics committee version.
Would you help us, Lee, with what-
Yeah, I think it's Article 8 is what you're referring to.
Section 8.
Yeah.
Section 8 says, after the committee discusses it, and then if the public official says, well, I may have a conflict, but I think I can be fair, and the other committee members say, no, this is too bad. We'd like you to recuse. We don't want to have the committee looking bad, or whatever. Now I'm talking to the town manager, not the town attorney, has raised this as a concern because, as far as I know, he contacted the VLCT and got a legal opinion from the attorney there saying that it cannot happen, and cited a case, Bennington v. Booth, a 1928 case, right? Yes. So I read Bennington v. Booth. In Bennington v. Booth, the select board had told the elected town clerk that we don't like the way you're recording deeds, we want you to record it a different way. And so they went to the Vermont Supreme Court. And they found, well, with the way that the elected clerk was recording deeds was legal. And the select board could not tell. The selectmen have no express power to require the town clerk who keeps his records in a lawful manner to conform to their ideas as to what method he shall use. They had no authority to give the notice above referred to. So I'm trying to figure out what that has to do with whether members of a committee can tell a other member of the committee who's appointed. My version tonight would say you cannot do it with an elected public officials, but with appointed public officials, they should be able to have that person recuse, and certainly this case doesn't say anything that that's not possible. So that's the third area.
Gotcha.
But if you have a strong feeling on that, I'll tell my committee. And the other issue, which I consider relatively minor, but I can't figure out the town attorney's definition of de minimis here. It seems complicated and lengthy. The definition that the committee used is straightforward. It's right from the Code of Judicial Conduct. I don't know why this is an improvement.
This is on page 2.
Yeah. Those are the 4 areas.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On page 5, there are all these underlines for, which seem to be a question between probable cause and reasonable likelihood. If I remember, that was a whole discussion way back when.
Right.
Is that still an issue?
Yeah, well, no, the town attorney said, well, probable cause is a criminal term, so I don't think we should use it. So, and Tom and I agreed, so we got rid of the term probable cause entirely. We took it out of the definition section, and now it just says if the committee, after the committee holds a hearing, no, when a complaint is filed, the committee will meet, and instead of decide whether there's probable cause, the committee will meet to decide whether there's a reasonable likelihood that a violation occurred. And I agree with that.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment.
All right, so here we are.
I had a couple of other comments. There was just a couple of other things. One of them was in, upon receipt of a complaint regarding a public official. So Lee, we are in Article 11, Section C,
Thank you.
number 3.
What was that, Colleen?
It's upon receipt,
11.
11C3.
A.
A, yes. Upon receipt of a complaint regarding a public official, the committee shall undertake a confidential preliminary investigation of the complaint in a closed deliberative session. And I took issue with the word investigation because I think it does lend to an expansion of responsibilities. It implies an actual investigation. And I think I know what you mean by that, meaning that you want to talk in a closed deliberative session or discuss. So I think that there just needs to be a different word there. I think that most people that are, it's more of an alarming word. And there could be a better word selection.
Would inquiry be a better word there?
Yeah, like inquiry or discussion, or what was the other word?
Okay.
It can be a little loaded word, right?
Or review?
Yeah, a review of a preliminary review of the complaint.
Well, I think I like inquiry because we're going to asking questions of the complainant and the respondent. I think that would work.
That work?
I'll ask the committee, but it works for me.
And then something else that I had discussed with other board members was this: at any time, the committee may appoint a mediator where the complainant and respondent are amenable to mediation. And I thought that was kind of like an important part. Because, like you said, much of what you'd like to do is education, and to avoid having complaints filed in the first place, then maybe when a complaint is filed, then maybe just a simple discussion between the two parties might resolve it. And so instead of saying at any time they may appoint a mediator, then maybe moving that up as
Shall?
and encourage the use of a mediator versus just may or may not, and where there is like an attempt to find a peaceful resolution to an issue versus encouraging the opposite.
Well, I think that's the intent. We want mediation. You can't require mediation, as you know. but we would, because if people aren't,
You don't have a problem encouraging it, though,
well,
in the right circumstance. I mean, if there's lots of
there are
reasons.
some circumstances when that would not be appropriate, right?
Correct.
Right.
It already says when they're amenable.
Yeah, so,
Which,
I would have a problem with encourage.
sorry?
I would have problem with, there may be some cases where it would be inappropriate to encourage mediation, just like you wouldn't want mediation in a domestic abuse case. And I don't know what type of complaint we would get that would be like that, but it's possible, I guess.
So you'd have a problem with shall encourage versus may.
Well, I'm open to other language, but I wouldn't like shall encourage.
I'll point out that it comes up twice. Comes up in Article 11B, C, and it comes up in Article 11C, D. BC says that the Ethics Committee is authorized to mediate a complaint or potential complaint for Ethics Committee approval where the complainant and respondent are amenable or agreeable to mediation.
Right.
Is there a difference between the two clauses substantively anyway?
It's just, the second one, a complaint had already been filed, it's getting towards a hearing, and the other one just get authority to do it at any time. We certainly, with the idea, we certainly want mediation in all appropriate cases, and, to the extent, I don't know, it'll be case, how you approach that, I don't know how, but we made a point of putting authority in here to do that, which we did not have before. And so we like the idea of mediation, I just don't know.
Well, to follow on Josh's comment, maybe there's a way to strengthen it, which seems to be Colleen's point, by putting a term stronger than may, and we'll look to you for suggestions.
Okay, I'll ask the committee, but, as one of your members said, I think saying shall encourage in all cases would be a problem.
And I didn't recommend shall encourage in all cases, but, shall encourage a mediator where the complainant and the respondent are amenable to a mediation. Where it's a case in which
Okay.
that's a possibility.
These are good comments, I'll take them back to the committee.
And then I have one more. So the last one is Article 11D, and it's about the funding. And so the Ethics Committee may spend funds allocated to it by the Select Board. The committee may spend additional funds as approved by the town manager or the Select Board. So one is just, there's a redundancy there, right? There's, the Ethics Committee may spend funds as directed, and then they may spend additional funds. Well, there's no funds allocated to begin with, and so there's no initial funds and then additional funds.
I disagree.
Okay,
I mean, if you're asking, is that a question or a statement?
it was a comment, but I haven't finished.
Okay.
So my suggestion would be, and this is my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the issue that the Ethics Committee had was whether they had the right or the ability to come before the Select Board and ask for funds. Then I misunderstood. And this was allowing them, giving them their voice to be able to come before the Select Board to ask for that.
Is that a question?
That is a question.
Okay. I think the
That's a
idea would
question
be,
for me.
the idea is, I think I explained this last time. We intend, as any committee can, to come to the Select Board to request a line item in the budget. You can approve it or not. And there's nothing in here that requires you to approve it. If you do put a line out in the budget of $10,000, let's say, and we have a complicated case and we need additional money, then we would go to the town manager for authority to spend additional money, which he or she can approve or not. So that's why it's worded that way.
Why do we even need this?
Oh, I think we need this.
No, I'm asking, why do we need this provision, may spend? Why would you not spend funds allocated to you? I see the second issue here, but I don't want to confuse the two issues. The one issue is you're allocated monies by the select board in a budget. Why would it need to say may spend? Presumably, we wouldn't allocate the funds in a budget if we didn't think you could spend them.
That's a good point.
Well, because if you allocate 10,000, we may want to spend only 500.
No, but that's not the point of this. It's not say may spend all or some or a part of. It just simply says may spend funds. Our assumption in budget, allocating it to a variety of bodies, is that they will spend it. And if less, fine. If they need more, subject to request. I don't understand why this even has to be in here.
I don't understand the problem with it being in there.
I think it's superfluous.
Could we simply say, with respect to funding, that the Ethics Committee has the right to seek funding in appropriate cases from the Select Board, which funding, maybe we can even go so far as to say which funding will not be unreasonably denied?
No.
I do think that there was a circumstance last year, and I wasn't on the board for this part, but I'm relying on what I read in the papers, where there was an effort to get some funding so that this committee could carry out its duties in the most appropriate way. And I know in my experience on the Development Review Board, there were times when we were allocated assistance when it was determined that the matter before us merited or warranted some assistance, a couple of difficult hearings. So I personally, for one, would like to have something in the ordinance that makes it clear that it wouldn't be inappropriate for a member or the chair of the Ethics Committee to come before the Select Board and basically say, look, we have this difficult complaint in front of us. We need some assistance in order to carry it out. Secure in the knowledge that the Select Board would listen to the request and treat it appropriately and give it due consideration. So that's why I'm in favor of putting something in there to avoid what happened last time round, where, at least in my impression, when I read the papers, that the Ethics Committee was not given sort of due process, if you will, or at least that's how it came across in the
I could
papers, and I
clarify
wasn't
if you'd
on the
like.
board.
I think we're obviously going to have a good, healthy discussion on this item. But let's return. The hour's late. Oh, we're going to run into limitations on how much faster we can think and appreciate.
That ship sailed for me about an hour and a half ago.
Appreciate others' points of view. And some of our favorite programs have long since run and just about finished, but I'm going to stop right now. I think the next step is to come back on the 9th with all of this information gathered with Lee's help and Jamie's help, I'll ask him, and your help and your committee meeting, so that we have in front of us on the 9th an omnibus piece that everyone has contributed to and made their final arguments and adjustments and proposals to, and that tonight we formally establish the 23rd as the hearing.
Well,
I don't think we're ready.
as I've said before, this has been incredibly confusing to me. So I would like to review my remembrance of how we got here. In the same way that I expressed concerns about how the stormwater ordinance has progressed, and I thought we were doing really well with the ethics ordinance. My remembrance, and please, I'm stating this because I want to know if I've got it wrong, was the last time this came up before the Select Board. It was the draft, we discussed items then. It was a draft that we were being asked to either to approve at that point. Or, no, I'm sorry. It was a draft that we were asked that was going to go to a public hearing. Then there was a discussion about whether town attorney should review the thing, and there was differences of opinion about that. But the document that existed at last time was the document that was going to be discussed at the town hearing. We then agreed that it would be reviewed by the town attorney. At what I hear tonight, that's where all the language, we were given a document that the ethics committee was happy with. My understanding was it was going to the town attorney to determine if there were any questions.
That's correct.
Tonight,
That's what happened.
all this, so then we've had all sorts of discussion
what are you
about it.
objecting to, Josh?
I'm just trying to say, how did we get here? And I'm not avoiding, but I'm not quite sure how, Jamie, you had a conversation with Tom Little and the town attorney that was outside the select board. I'm not sure how that happened and why.
Because we asked Jamie to contact the town attorney.
I don't
We
remember
agreed
that.
on a town attorney review,
Yes?
and we asked Jamie he's the liaison, along with Mary, to the committee.
Okay.
And we asked him, there's no point in having 4 or 5 of us.
Right. I
Right.
don't, this is
And-
what I'm trying to understand.
And I think it's, at this point, much less worthwhile thinking about how we got here than where we're going.
No, but just, I mean, for
All
transparency,
I'm-
it's worth
yeah,
telling
All I'm
you.
trying to understand, and all I'm trying to point out, is that we really have to have some real thought about the process by which ordinances are created, reviewed, and passed. And my experience is, my time on the board, is there's real issues with this.
Yeah.
I disagree. So here's what happened. I asked the chair if he wanted me to bird dog it because we had a target for a public hearing and we had issues with maybe the pace of attorney review. So I said, I'm happy to just stay on Brian, right, and push this along. And Tom sent me a note saying, hey, would you like my help? Absolutely, right? Why would I ever turn that down? So we set up a call with Brian, talked through these issues. He provided a markup with his comments to Tom and I, which then made its way to Lee and Lee, and that's where we are, right? We
Yeah.
have the town attorney's input. I feel like the process worked as
I
it
mean,
should.
But there's,
What-
I've
here, what-
heard 4 different documents that, I mean, this is what I'm saying, is that
What
we
typically
had a
doesn't
document,
happen-
we had a document last time that was, for all intents and purposes, the select board was happy with. That wasn't the question. We had agreed, my understanding is the select board had agreed that the document that was in front of us was a final product of the ethics committee that the select board was subject to that. All of a
The town
sudden,
attorney, Josh, made some comments.
right, but we've had a lot of other comments here that were completely outside
Okay.
of the town attorney's comments. So this is what I'm
But
trying to say.
that's part of the process
What's wrong
when
with
we're
that?
going through.
That would, I am not saying there is anything, but my understanding is it would have been more appropriate for those comments to come up at the public hearing. If that, because at some point,
We haven't
you
warned
have
the
to
public
say,
hearing yet.
here's a draft.
We're
haven't
talking about
warned the public
scheduling.
hearing.
I know, but here's the draft that's going to
Okay.
the public
Josh, with
hearing.
all due respect, Josh, if we've
Okay.
stumble bummed around here, that's okay.
I'm just trying to understand.
We're
That's all it
amateurs,
is.
and I think we've arrived at a point where we have a plan for everybody who should be involved, getting involved. And we have an expectation that at our next meeting, the 9th, we will have a final product. And I still would seek a motion to establish the 23rd as the hearing on this ordinance.
Briefly, if I may.
Yes.
So my question procedurally is, we did what the board asked, gained council's review. The challenge appears to be that where does it go from there? Because if it's going to come to you and you ask for council's review, that's council's review to you.
Right.
So if that has to bounce back to the underlying advisory committee, then it might need council review again, and that becomes a never-ending ping pong match. So my question procedurally is, what are we really doing between now and the 9th? And secondly, it'll be already too late to warn a hearing for the 23rd because we don't yet have a document you've agreed to
All
run
right, here's my
with.
response.
So
What we're doing is providing for the committee to meet, not Lee, not Tom, the whole committee, to review the various comments and suggestions to this point, to come back to us on the 9th with their final take.
which will not have been reviewed by town council again, which will have been changed from when Brian first reviewed it.
Right, but I
Yeah,
think,
but I mean,
I
we
think
could
we can take
review
the committee's
reviews forever.
input.
No, I'm not looking
Yeah,
for
I think we
perpetual
stop
review.
reviewing
Yeah.
reviews at a point, and I'm confident that between Jamie and Mary especially, we're able to handle what might be questions about the town attorney's vet, in addition to committee input. I don't know why we couldn't agree on a final to be therefore the subject of a hearing October 23rd.
Because
We
of
have to,
the publication deadlines
we have
don't
to
work.
notice.
Because we meet Tuesdays, it's already too late to get it in the paper for that week.
Okay,
So it can't hit it till the
All right.
next week, and that's only
And
5
I think
days
we have to
before.
put
Okay.
the
First one in
ordinance it,
November,
too.
then.
got you,
So-
okay, simple.
It's a timing issue,
So the actual hearing would be 1st of November.
that first meeting in November.
That would make it within 6 months of when we started. No, it wouldn't.
No, it's beyond 6 months.
Yeah.
But
Now,
I think if we want to move this along, it would be helpful if the two liaisons from the select board joined our committee, and that would help to come up with a version that is not going to, at least two of you will agree to.
If Mary and Jamie agreed, that would be fantastic.
I didn't say fantastic.
I'm happy to sit in again.
Okay with you?
Linda's got a question.
Okay with you, Jamie? and- Okay?
Thank you. I'll be in touch with them. You have a comment?
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lee. There wasn't really time
Thank you,
for
Lynn.
public comment on all that, but I just want to make a quick one that people in this community were beseeched by the Ethics Committee to give input, and a number of us went to a number of those meetings and gave our input, and the advisory role was something that we felt was really important. Just to have somebody to talk to say, this is what I'm thinking. Would this be a possible complaint? Does this not fall into the category? We are not attorneys ourselves. We don't understand all the legalese, and a person to advise and just give a little assistance would be a positive thing for residents, I think.
Thank you, Linda.
Move to adjourn?
Adjourn. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, those approved, please signify by saying aye. Aye, and opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. It's been a long time. Peter, thank you for hanging in here the whole night.